Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into ancient Athens. It's dazzling, golden, intellectual, and more disturbing than your high school history class ever hinted. On the surface, you'll see temples glowing in the sunset, philosophers debating beneath fig trees, an artist chiseling out eternity in marble. But beneath all that grandeur, a shadowy economy fueled by power, control, and flesh. We're not here to judge, just to understand. But brace yourself, because honestly, you probably won't survive this world if you're anything but a privileged-free male citizen. And even then, the cultural contradictions might fry your brain a little. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. Also, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little rabbit hole travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of the Athenian Acropolis in the year 432 BCE, and honestly, it's stunning. Sunlight glints off the freshly built Parthenon, the marble pillars whiter than you imagined, each etched with impossible detail. The wind smells faintly of olives and hot dust, and everywhere people are in motion, some in crisp white chitons, others in grimy work robes, all funneling toward the agora. It's loud, chaotic, and, if you listen closely, alive with contradictions. Men dominate the streets. You see them arguing politics, trading amphorae of wine, exchanging gossip about generals and poets. Women? Nowhere. You scan the crowd again. A couple of old crones with baskets, a veiled figure hurrying past the stoa. But that's it. Most women in Athens, you're about to learn, don't get to wander marketplaces or debate ethics over mead. No. Most are locked behind high courtyard walls, invisible, and yet oddly, sex is everywhere. Erotic pottery, crude graffiti, whispers in bathhouses, and paintings on symposium walls. It's as if Athenian men are obsessed with what they're pretending to control. You pass by a vendor selling clay figurines. One of them is a reclining woman, legs suggestively open, a smirk carved into her tiny face. This isn't modern irony. It's their art, their humour, their worldview. But here's the wild thing, prostitution in Athens isn't illegal. It's not even shameful, so long as you're the buyer. It's baked into the social system, a pressure valve for a city that restricts female autonomy to absurd degrees. The state doesn't just tolerate prostitution, it profits from it, regulates it, and categorizes it like a bureaucratic fever dream. There are layers to this, like an onion, or more accurately, like a parfait laced with wine, blood, and hierarchy. You walk past a bronze plaque near the Dippelon Gate, where some faded official decree outlines the city's proper uses for brothels. The wording is stiff, euphemistic, and weirdly clinical. If you're a freeborn Athenian male, you're expected to indulge. This isn't some fringe behaviour. It's part of your citizenship benefits. Just don't fall in love with a working girl. That'll get you laughed out of the symposium and possibly disowned by your dad. As you turn down a narrow lane, something shifts. The stone under your sandals feels sticky. The shadows are longer here, the air denser. A group of men laugh raucously near a doorway, tossing coins to a doorman with a lion tattoo on his shoulder. Inside, flickering oil lamps reveal flashes of exposed skin, the clink of wine cups, and painted eyes watching from behind gauzy curtains. You've found your first brothel, but don't expect some salacious luxury. Most of these joints are cheap, rough, and mechanical. The women here are pornai, slaves. The name comes from pernami, to sell. They're sold, rented, taxed, no agency, no pretense. They're packed into small rooms, often with dirt floors and reused bedding. They might service a dozen men a night. And the state? Oh, it's taking its cut. Solon, the same lawmaker who helped invent democracy, also helped legalize state-run brothels, making sure the city got a steady revenue stream, one coin at a time. Still, not all prostitutes are trapped in filth and anonymity. Some live in villas, dine with philosophers, and spar verbally with generals. These are the hetairae, companions, educated, witty, fluent in music and philosophy. They often wield more influence than respectable wives ever could. A hetera might attend the exclusive male-only symposiums, reclining beside the same men who write laws and command armies. But that status is a tightrope walk. One scandal, one powerful enemy, and she could fall straight into oblivion. Her freedom is conditional, her fame disposable. You'll learn more about those women soon. For now, you follow the laughter of a passing drunk merchant. He staggers past a marble stele that marks a small temple. Beside it, carved into the stone, is a curious figure. Aphrodite, goddess of love, and also, weirdly, goddess of prostitutes. It's an ancient combo platter, sacred love and transactional sex wrapped in myth and ritual. The lines blur constantly in this city. Now, here's something fun. While some brothels were hidden, many were just there, public, obvious. You could walk past a wine shop and boom, there's a brothel upstairs or downstairs, or in the alley out back. Ancient Athenians even built a street nicknamed the Keramakos Meat Market, where the girls would advertise from windows or stand near doorways, sometimes painted or tattooed to mark their status. One theory, hotly debated, is that they'd wear specific footwear with words carved into the soles so their footprints would literally advertise, "Follow me." Yeah, literal foot traffic marketing. Of course, not everyone agrees that these shoes ever existed. Some scholars call it an urban legend of antiquity, maybe a misreading of a comedic play. Others say it absolutely happened, and point to pottery showing sandals with odd markings. Honestly, you kind of hope it's true because ancient Greece already feels like a fever dream, and footprint advertising prostitutes somehow makes it weirder and more logical all at once. As twilight sinks over Athens, the buildings glow orange and pink, shadows creeping across the agora. Somewhere a flute begins to play. A group of young men pass you, laughing loudly, already buzzed on cheap wine. They're headed to a house just beyond the Nix Hill, one with red-painted doors and incense curling out the windows. You feel a strange chill. You're beginning to see how deeply embedded sex work is in every layer of this society. It's not just tolerated, it's structured, codified, normalized. And yet, behind every joke, every casual transaction, there's a woman. Often enslaved, often scared, often invisible. Tonight, you've only scratched the surface of this system. You haven't even seen the port yet, or the state-owned brothels with hundreds of trafficked girls, or the ones forced to smile through symposiums where politics and lust mix like wine and water. That's for tomorrow. For now, you return to your rented bedroll at the back of a quiet stoa. The wind is soft. The stars are out. And somewhere behind one of those red doors, a girl who doesn't even speak Greek is trying to forget her own name. Morning comes to Athens slowly, like a groggy drunk trying to remember where he left his sandals. You're already awake, tucked under the eaves of a stoa where the stone still holds last night's warmth. The street stirs with the sound of carts creaking and goats bleating as the city stretches its limbs. You wander through the waking city with sleep still in your eyes, but your mind already pulls at a thread from last night. Where are all the women? You squint into the early light as men file into the agora, bantering, haggling, clapping each other's backs. Philosophers cluster in one corner like pigeons around breadcrumbs, already arguing over forms and ethics. Politicians sweep past in clean robes, sandals barely dusty. You take it all in and realize something glaring. It's still mostly men, the women of Athens. They have disappeared again, as if the sun chases them indoors. You wander the back streets, past rows of mud brick homes with high walls and locked doors. Occasionally, a tiny window peeks out covered in latticework or heavy cloth. It's behind those barriers that the women of respectable households live, if live is the right word. Technically, they're called gynekonitis, women's quarters. It sounds like something like a conservatory or atrium, but it's more like a heavily policed domestic cell. Their job? Keep the household running, bear legitimate children, and never ever be seen. You pass one home where the sound of grinding stone hums behind a wall. That's a wife, or a female slave, preparing barley into flour. She'll cook, weave, maybe bathe a child, tasks that keep her permanently off stage. If you're a free Athenian woman, you won't attend school, vote, inherit land, or walk the marketplace alone. You're meant to be modest, silent, invisible. This invisibility is considered virtuous, praised even. The ideal woman, according to the poet Xenophon, is one whose name is never mentioned, neither praised nor criticized. And here's the contradiction slapping you awake. This hyper-controlled invisibility of respectable women is the very reason prostitution becomes not just common, but culturally necessary. Athenian men want companionship, conversation, and, well, everything else. They're not allowed to ask of their wives. So instead of relaxing the gender rules, the system develops a loophole. Women outside the system, women who aren't bound by citizenship or marriage, women you can pay. which brings you back to the three main tiers of prostitutes: pornai, hetairae, and the grey space in between. Pornai, you remember, are often slaves, cheap, owned, managed by pimps or madams, sometimes by the state itself. Hetairae, though, they're something different. They're the social lubricants of Athenian elite culture. Educated, clever, desirable, and never citizens. That's key. Citizenship means restriction. Non-citizen status means freedom, in a twisted sort of way. And there's another layer to this, a whispered hypocrisy that no one seems to want to name. Many Athenian men who publicly shame prostitutes also rely on them privately. Even Socrates, famed for his moral rigour, was rumoured to spend time with hetairae. Not sexually, supposedly, he preferred talking, but still he didn't avoid them. In fact, he admired Aspasia, the most infamous hetaira of all. She wasn't just a beauty, she ran her own salon, advised statesmen, and may have ghost-written Pericles' most famous speeches, or not. Scholars still argue that one like cats over a fishbone. Was Aspasia a manipulative courtesan, or an intellectual powerhouse? Depends who you ask, or more accurately, which ancient man wrote the version you're reading. You keep walking and end up near the law courts, where a trial is just beginning. You sneak in, ducking behind a stone pillar, and catch the rhythm of the argument. The speaker, a grim-faced man in a sharp himation, is defending himself in a murder case. He killed a man, yes, but the victim had been sleeping with his wife, and according to Athenian law, that's justifiable homicide. Here's the twist. If the wife had merely been a prostitute or even a hetaira, this wouldn't fly. The law only protects the honour of respectable wives, women locked away, traded like cattle in arranged marriages, with no public lives. So let's recap. The wife must remain silent, hidden, and submissive, or risk dishonouring her husband. The prostitute, meanwhile, may talk, joke, even philosophise, but only because she has no legal status. One is invisible and sacred, the other visible and expendable. Either way, neither is free. As the trial wraps up and the crowd disperses, you overhear an old man muttering about how the city's morals are falling apart. In my day, he says, we had real modesty. You want to ask him if a real modesty includes buying sex from teenage slaves in Piraeus, but you don't. The self-delusion is thick enough to paddle through. And speaking of Piraeus, that's where you're heading next. But not just yet. First you pause at a small shrine dedicated to Artemis, goddess of purity. At the base of her statue lies a smear of red petals, coins, and a small bronze dildo. You blink. It's not what you expect, but it fits. Athenian religion doesn't draw neat lines between purity and passion. Aphrodite is honoured in temples and brothels. Artemis is invoked by virgin girls and sometimes by brothel madams seeking protection for their girls. It's all gloriously inconsistent. In fact, there's a fringe belief among some modern scholars, very debated, almost laughably specific, that Artemis may have had her own set of sacred attendants in certain mystery cults. Were they sex workers? Priestesses? Both? It's hard to say. The records are a mix of myth, gossip, and wild speculation. The ancient world doesn't always tell us the truth. It just leaves us broken puzzle pieces and dares us to draw our own lines. Back on the main road, you watch a parade pass. A small religious procession celebrating Dionysus. Wine, fertility, wild behaviour. A flute plays a snaking melody. One of the dancers wears a mask with an enormous exaggerated phallus. Another flashes the crowd, earning cheers. This isn't a scandal, it's a festival. During Dionysian rites, sexual boundaries loosen and roles invert. For a few days, even the most cloistered women might dance in public, drink too much, flirt too freely. Then it all snaps back to normal, like a hangover that comes with social order. You realise that Athens is a city built on rigid gender roles and the relentless need to break them in secret. Women live hidden lives unless they're paid not to. Men worship virtue while feeding their vices behind red doors. And everyone pretends it's normal because, in a way, it is. As the sun dips lower Owen, casting long shadows on the stone streets, you catch the scent of baking bread and wood smoke. Somewhere a prostitute is finishing her meal before the next client. Somewhere else a wife is praying her husband doesn't bring disease home from the brothel. And everywhere the city hums with contradictions, held together by silence and denial. You walk on, up, the sky darkening above. You don't know it yet, but tomorrow you'll see the port, and that's where the real nightmares are docked. The road to Piraeus is dusty, crowded and loud. A river of donkeys, carts, shouting traders, and the occasional runaway chicken. You follow the flow, watching the landscape change from refined marble courtyards to storage yards and graffiti-smeared taverns. The air thickens with salt, sweat, and something more pungent. The unmistakable stench of desperation. This is the main artery connecting Athens to its lifeline, the port where wealth pours in and, more quietly, people are bought and sold. By the time you reach the harbour, the sea glows like hammered bronze. Ships creak in their moorings. Sailors bark in Phoenician, Egyptian and broken Greek. You see cargo being unloaded, olive oil, amphorae of wine, fresh fish, but also people. Women and girls wrapped in coarse linens, eyes downcast, chained together in threes. You pause, stomach tight. This isn't the part of the ancient world you imagined in school, is it? Welcome to the darker half of the Athenian economy, human trafficking. And it's not an underground operation, it's out in the open, normalised. Enslaved women arrive in Piraeus from Thrace, Asia Minor, North Africa, anywhere the empire's reach extends. Some were kidnapped in raids, others sold by families deep in debt, and a few deceived by false promises of domestic work. Once here, they're inspected, auctioned, and funneled into brothels like livestock. You follow the trail to one of the state-sanctioned brothels near the water. It's more structured than you expect. There's a ledger by the entrance. A wax tablet listing rates, services, and inventory. A man in a short chiton, a state employee, keeps track of each transaction with bureaucratic precision. 5 obols for this girl, 3 for that one. Some are listed as new, others as trained. A few are already marked as sick or retired. It's chilling. This isn't just tolerated, it's regulated. The state gets a cut of every visit. Here's where things get weird. Some historians believe the city's famous politician and reformer, Solon, you know, the father of democracy guy, was the one who institutionalized these brothels to protect society from illicit urges. According to one ancient source, he even established a tax specifically for prostitutes. Think about that, a lawmaker creating a legal framework for sex slavery in the name of civic stability. Is the ancient version of saying, hey, at least it's organized. Of course there's debate. Did Solon really do it? Or did later writers blame him to legitimize an already gross system? Scholars go back and forth, often citing contradictory sources. Some say the story's propaganda designed to moralize chaos. Others insist it's accurate, down to the location of the original brothel near the marketplace. Honestly, it could be both. Athens loved a myth that made its vices sound noble. Inside the brothel, everything's practical and grim. The rooms are small, cramped, hot. There's no privacy, no luxury. The walls are painted in faded reds and yellows, cheap pigments slapped on like makeup over a bruise. Some girls sit on low stools staring at nothing. One hums softly under her breath, just loud enough to drown out the moans from the next room. You catch a glance from one of them, barely more than a girl. She's too tired to hate you, just numb. You turn away, your skin crawling. There's no moral escape here, no high ground to retreat to. This is Athens, the city of Plato, Sophocles and Pericles, and its cultural brilliance is built in part on bodies like these. Sex work wasn't some fringe industry. It was mainstream, profitable, and quietly essential. You step back outside and find a shady corner near a fish stall to breathe. The vendor, a chatty old man with 3 teeth and a face like sun-baked leather, starts telling you how business booms when the sailors are in. They come in full of coin and appetite, he chuckles. Wine, women, and fish, always in that order. You ask him how girls end up in the brothels. He shrugs. Sometimes they're captured. Sometimes they're born to it. Sometimes they run from worse. Then he points a greasy finger toward a group of teenage boys unloading a ship. That one, his sister got taken last spring. Bad debt. She's up in Keramakos now. You don't ask what he means by taken. You already know. Still, not all sex workers in Piraeus are slaves. Some are technically free women, though that word feels laughable here. These women might rent rooms in the red light district, set their owners' prices, and pay a fee to the local official. They're called independent, but their freedom depends entirely on the goodwill of pimps, port guards, and corrupt magistrates. One wrong move and they're branded, imprisoned, or worse. You overhear 2 women chatting in a doorway, faces lined from too many nights and too little rest. One jokes about an Athenian general who likes to cry after sex. The other laughs, takes a drag from a pipe, and says, They all do, they're just boys in armour. There's a strange power in her voice, cynical, sharp, but it doesn't hide the fatigue. She's not free, just surviving. As you walk the length of the harbour, you notice a temple off to the side, small, tucked between warehouses. It's dedicated to Aphrodite Pandemos, Aphrodite of all the people. Some say her worship here catered specifically to prostitutes and sailors. Inside, incense clings to the walls. Offerings sit in little bowls, wine, olives, carved phalluses. A strange kind of sanctuary. But one thing's clear, even in religion, prostitutes had a place, just never an equal one. And here's a quirky fact for you. Some brothels in pre-years reportedly had automatic doors. That's right, ancient automation powered by counterweights and pulleys to swing open the door when a client arrived. Makes sense, really. Why waste a worker on door duty when you can redirect her energy elsewhere? It sounds clever, until you realise it's probably another way to dehumanize the people inside, replacing even their greetings with machinery. By nightfall, the port becomes a different creature. Drunken songs echo between buildings, the water reflects flickering torchlight like the eyes of something watching. More ships dock, more girls disappear. You sit near the quay, feet dangling over the edge, and watch a cargo ship unload what looks like, no it is, people. Young, frightened, shackled. There's no outcry, no protest. This is routine, and yet within this nightmarish world there are still moments of resilience. You see a girl slip a coin into the hand of another, whisper something, and they both laugh, quiet and tired, but real. A sailor offers his coat to one of them in the cold. An older prostitute shields a younger one from a violent client. These moments won't undo the system, but they carve out slivers of humanity in a place that tries so hard to strip it away. You lie back on a crate near the shore, eyes tracing the stars. Athens glitters behind you like a city of gold, but now you know how much of that shine is stolen. From Piraeus, the truth looks clearer. The empire of ideas is also an empire of bodies, and for every statue standing tall on the Acropolis, there's a girl curled up in a windowless room, counting coins she'll never get to keep. You wake up to the clatter of fishmongers and the smell of salt-crusted seaweed stuck to your tunic. The dock is already crawling with people. Sailors hoist barrels, merchants bellow prices. A donkey somewhere refuses to cooperate. You rub your eyes, roll your shoulders, and remind yourself, you slept next to a brothel that doubles as a prison. Time to go deeper. You follow a side street branching off the main port, narrower, darker, and lined with buildings that look like they were never meant to be anything but temporary. This part of Piraeus isn't on any tourist vase painting. The walls here are crumbling, the alleys smell like wine, urine, and spoiled fish. But you're not here for the views. You're here for the stories buried beneath the filth. A crowd gathers outside a crumbling doorway painted with chipped red symbols. There's no sign, but you don't need one. This is a state-run brothel, cheap and fast, designed for the lower rungs of society. Dock workers, mercenaries, sailors with a day's pay and nowhere to spend it. The doorman barely glances at the line, just grunts, takes coins and waves people through like it's a meat market. Which, in a way it is. Inside it's dim, humid and strangely quiet. The silence of exhaustion. The hallway leads to a row of tiny chambers, each separated by thin wooden walls, more like animal stalls than rooms. You peek into one and immediately wish you hadn't. The floor is sticky, the bedding is straw barely clean. On one wall, someone's scratched tally marks. Days? Clients? Who knows? You step aside as a girl is led out by a short, rotund man with gold rings and no visible neck. The girl looks no older than 14. Her eyes are red, not from crying, those tears dried up a long time ago, but from smoke, fatigue, and the slow erosion of identity. She doesn't look at anyone, not even you. She's led like furniture being returned to storage. The man with the rings mutters something to the doorman. Something about raising prices, demand is high, and the new girl from Thrace is popular. You catch a name, Melita, but you can tell that's not her real one. None of the girls use real names here. It's safer to pretend you're someone else. You watch as men enter and exit with robotic efficiency. Some are drunk, some whistling, some just blank. They pay a small fee, sometimes only a single obol, the price of a cheap loaf of bread. That's how little it costs to buy a body for 15 minutes. You can't tell if the low price makes it more horrifying or less. It just is. And here's something that makes your stomach turn. This place is legal, licensed. taxed. The city of Athens collects revenue from this misery. In fact, they rely on it. A portion of the taxes gathered from brothels like this goes directly to state funds. Some even say, though sources vary, that the revenue helped pay for the walls of Athens. Imagine that. A city literally built on the backs of enslaved girls. Democracy funded by the degradation. You pass another room and spot a crude oil lamp on a shelf. Next to it, a tiny figurine of Aphrodite, worn smooth from handling. It's a desperate thing, a piece of comfort clutched by someone who has no other power left. You wonder if she prays to be freed or just for a gentler client. Maybe she doesn't pray at all anymore. The room next to it has a different decoration. Drawings on the wall done in charcoal. You lean closer. They're simple but strangely elegant. A tree, a dog, a child. Someone's memory scratched into a wall that absorbs every nightmare. There's an entire life inside these lines, one you'll never fully understand, and that's what hits you. The scale of it. For every famous name you've read in history, there were thousands of women like this. Unnamed, unrecorded, unchosen. You step outside for air, your head spinning. The heat is oppressive. The street smells like fish guts and despair. A group of men stagger past, laughing and slapping each other's backs. One of them holds a tiny bronze token in his hand, a pornobellos, used as proof of payment at certain brothels. Like a poker chip, only instead of winning, you've bought access to someone who can't say no. You follow them toward another brothel, this one even rougher. No doorman, just a curtain and a hand-painted sign showing a reclining figure and a few numbers. This place is off the books. Unlicensed, unmanaged, and dangerous. Here, the rules get murky. Violence is common. If a girl gets injured, sick or dies, well, there's always another shipment arriving next week. And yet, in the middle of this squalor, you spot a moment that stops you cold. A girl, barely a woman, sits outside braiding another's hair. They laugh. It's a soft sound, oddly out of place, like a flute note in a storm. They're still human, still finding pieces of themselves to share. Maybe it's a way to stay sane. Maybe it's rebellion, quiet but stubborn. As you walk past, one of the girls glances up, not with fear, with boredom, like she's seen you 1,000 times in 1,000 forms. You feel small under that gaze, like a child who wandered somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. And maybe you weren't. Now here's a quirky little fringe fact. The ancient Greek comic poet Philemon once joked that brothels should qualify as public spaces, like theatres and baths. It's meant as satire, of course, but it reflects something deeper. In Athens, brothels were public. Not hidden, not whispered about. They were part of the architecture of daily life, like bakeries, but with screams instead of bread. Of course, not everyone accepted this status quo. There were critics, quiet ones. Some philosophers questioned the morality. A few speeches survive where orators condemn the abuse of enslaved women. But these voices were rare and often ignored. The machine kept turning. As the sun begins to set, casting golden light across the harbour, you find a quiet bench between two cypress trees. From here you can see the full arc of Piraeus, the ships, the brothels, the temples, the people. Is a city within a city, hidden behind trade and noise, and at its heart is a chilling truth. In ancient Athens, sex was commerce, and commerce was power. The girls, they were just fuel. You lean back, eyes on the horizon, feeling the weight of a history that no one wanted to tell you. Not because it was hidden, but because it was inconvenient. Too raw, too bleak. But you've seen it now, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The deeper you slip into the city's after-hours pulse, the more the lines blur, between work and pleasure, law and chaos, man and animal. Night in Athens doesn't fall like a curtain. It crawls in, slow and sly, slipping between alleyways and settling like smoke into every cracked tile and crooked window. You trail behind a group of men staggering toward the edge of the city. Soldiers, maybe, or mercenaries on leave. Their swords clink against their thighs with every swaying step, but their laughter is light, easy. They're headed somewhere very specific. You follow them out past the Dippelon Gate through a field of weathered gravestones that glimmer pale under the moonlight. Beyond that, in the district of Kerameikos, once known for potters and tombs, something else pulses now. This is where the cheaper brothels squat, clustered together like drunk uncles at a funeral. Windows flicker with lamplight. Curtains flutter. A flute squeals out a drunken melody that trips on its own notes. This is the dockside meat market, and these men are here to feast. They started a place nicknamed the House of the Rope, known not for its decorations but for the city guards who'd literally drag loitering prostitutes back to it with a stained rope soaked in red pigment. The rope would leave a mark on the ground and on anyone it touched. If you were a prostitute not standing in your designated area during business hours, you'd be rounded up, humiliated, fined. The red dye would cling to your clothes and skin for days. You'd be branded as disorderly. It's bureaucracy disguised as shame, and the people enforcing it? Paid public officials. That's Athens for you. Inside the brothel, the air is sharp with vinegar and old incense. A woman sits in the corner, plucking at a lyre like she's punishing it. Another lounges by the door, her eyes scanning the new arrivals. Her dress is torn at the hem, and she wears heavy makeup that started to smear from the heat. Still she smiles, professionally wearily, the way someone might smile at their own reflection when they're too tired to creep. One of the mercenaries, a bald, beetle-browed man with an Egyptian scarab tattooed on his arm, throws down a coin and calls for the young one, and the girl who appears can't be older than 15. Her eyes are dull, her hair pulled back tight, her smile painted on like chipped lacquer. She leads him to the back room as easily as a waiter might seat a guest. No flinch, no delay. It's muscle memory now. Another man, drunker and louder, demands music and wine. He wants entertainment before he chooses. A woman steps forward, tall, dark-eyed, with a low voice that sounds like smoke soaked in honey. She pours him wine, refills his cup, leans in close as she listens to him brag about a campaign in Thrace. You watch the entire act, how she nods at all the right beats, laughs when prompted, tilts her head to flatter his ego. It's a routine, polished and hollow. She's not seducing him, she's managing him. The soldiers get rowdier. One flips a stool. Another tries to climb onto the central table and almost knocks himself unconscious on a ceiling beam. The brothel owner, a thick-set man with a missing ear, barks at them in a mix of threats and jokes. He's not worried. Damage to the building? That's a cost. Damage to the girls? That's replaceable. It's easy to get angry watching this. Easy to want someone to step in to say this isn't right. But there are no heroes here. This isn't a story with rescues. In ancient Athens, this behaviour isn't exceptional. It's normal, expected. When men are drunk and frustrated, they go where they can be in control. And the brothels? They're the only place in the entire city where they feel like gods. And here's something bitter to chew on. Many of these girls weren't born into slavery. Some were sold later by families who couldn't afford another mouth. Others were captured in war or raided from villages. A few were born to other prostitutes, inheriting the same fate like a family curse passed down with their first breath. You step outside needing air, only to find more of the same. Laughter. Vomit. Wine spilled into gutters. A woman arguing with a client who refuses to pay. She calls him a donkey-faced coward. He calls her a Thracian pig. A guard appears, takes the man's side without question, and slaps the woman hard enough to knock her against the wall. She doesn't fight back, she just straightens her dress, swallows her anger, and walks back inside. She knows how the system works. Now, Zimbua. Here's a quirky detail you might not expect. Some brothels had very specific niches, like the ones near the Tanners district, where the air always smelled like leather and ammonia. Workers there had odd tastes. Some demanded women with rough hands. Others wanted women who pretended to be silent or blind. A few brothels catered to these kinks like specialised bakeries. Want a girl who limps? A girl who pretends she doesn't speak Greek? There's a place for that. Somewhere always there's a place. Of course, not all historians agree on how widespread or specialised these preferences really were. Some argue that ancient writers exaggerated the extremes to make a point or to titillate. Others believe the stories reflect real practices, especially in districts that served foreign traders and mercenaries with their own cultural scripts. As with everything in ancient sex work, the truth is slippery, hidden in gossip, pottery shards, and speeches written by men who never set foot in these places. Or so they claimed. The soldiers eventually stumble out, louder now, talking over each other, bragging, slurring. One tries to sing. The tall woman who poured the wine watches them go with a blank face. But once the last footstep fades, she lets out a breath, pinches the bridge of her nose, and mutters something in a language you don't recognise. Then she goes back inside. There's another wave coming. You walk further, deeper into the district, where the flicker of lamps grows thinner and the silence thickens. Here, Brothels give way to makeshift dens, half-shuttered homes where women rent out corners of rooms, sometimes even blankets under porticos. No managers, no doors, just exposure. A girl sits under an archway, arms wrapped around her knees. She might be asleep, or drunk, or gone in that way you can't name. Her bare feet are bruised. One ankle is swollen. There's a smear of blood near her heel, drying slowly on the stone. You leave a coin near her hand, knowing it won't fix anything, but you leave it anyway. Athens is asleep now, or pretending to be. But beneath the lullaby of crickets and wind, you can still hear it. The creak of beds, the splash of wine, the sighs and cries muffled by walls no thicker than your arm. This city never really rests. It just hides its hunger behind tradition and rituals. The soldiers, they'll be back tomorrow. The girls, they'll still be here, some older, some gone, some replaced. You pull your cloak tight and find a quiet doorway to rest. Tomorrow, maybe, you'll see what life is like for the women who walk a finer line, who trade not just their bodies, but their wit, their charm, their minds, the hetairae. The so-called lucky ones. But tonight, you lie in a city that has never learned how to love without ownership. You wake to the sound of a lyre being tuned and the smell of roasted figs drifting down from a villa window. The air is cooler up here, in the wealthy districts of Athens, where the streets are paved smoother, the sandals are newer, and the men don't shout so much as they project, with the deep, careful confidence of people who assume they'll be listened to. It's a different world from the brothels of Kerameikos, or the fish-slick alleyways of Piraeus. Here, things are quieter, subtler, but don't get too comfortable. The deals made in this part of the city are just as transactional, only dressed in silk and wine. You've come to see the hetairae, not prostitutes, at least not in the way the pornai are. These are courtesans, companion women, educated, alluring, and socially slippery. They exist in a space just outside the rigid framework of Athenian womanhood. Not wives, not slaves, something in between. And that's where their power lives, in ambiguity. You're escorted, yes, escorted into a garden behind a villa near the Acropolis, where a gathering is already beginning. This isn't just any party, it's a symposium. And unless you're male, freeborn and connected, you don't get in. But tonight, you're slipping in with the help of a name you dropped, one you overheard near the port. The owner of the house is already deep into his second cup of wine, lounging on embroidered cushions, talking politics with two generals and a man who claims to have studied under Socrates. No one questions your presence. They assume you belong, or more accurately, they assume you're useful. The hetairae are already here, moving among the men like moonlight on water. Not loud, not overly dressed, just poised. One of them is playing the lyre with a rhythm so smooth you almost forget there's no drum. Another pours wine, eyes locked with a man across the room, her smile just crooked enough to be intriguing. They're not just serving, they're navigating, steering the mood, adjusting the currents. One wrong note, one bad joke, and the whole evening might tilt. You meet one called Thalea. Her voice is low and confident, her dress dyed in rich blues. Her hair pulled back with silver pins shaped like dolphins. She doesn't flirt, not in the traditional sense. She engages, asks where you're from, what you think of Euripides' latest tragedy, whether you believe beauty is a matter of symmetry or proportion. You stammer something half clever, and she nods. Not because you're right, but because you're trying. That's her art. She makes you feel intelligent while silently assessing your value. You notice she doesn't touch anyone, not like the pornai, who are expected to be all hands and compliance. Thalea maintains space, uses her voice and gaze as tools, not her body. She's selling access to conversation, mystery, possibility. And if that eventually leads to sex, it's on her terms, or at least it feels that way. The illusion of autonomy is her sharpest blade. It's easy to romanticize the hetairae. Ancient sources often do. They describe them as muses, seductresses, thinkers, even philosophers. Some are said to have influenced laws or shaped military campaigns, whispered ideas into the ears of history makers. And in some cases, maybe they did. Aspasia, the most famous hetaira of them all, lived openly with Pericles, Athens' golden boy. She hosted salons, debated rhetoric, and possibly even taught Socrates. She was mocked, loved, feared, and definitely talked about. Constantly. But here's the catch. She was never a citizen. She could never marry Pericles legally, never own land, never vote. Her status, like all Hetairai, was performative freedom. She could attend symposiums and challenge ideas, but she did so while walking a tightrope over a pit of public ridicule and political backlash. One wrong move, and she could fall straight into infamy. Or worse, obscurity. Thalia tells you that she speaks 3 languages, writes poetry, and has memorized large parts of Homer. She also tells you, casually, like it doesn't sting anymore, that her mother was sold into slavery when Thalia was a baby, and she was raised in the household of a merchant who trained her in music, dance, and politics. A form of grooming dressed up as education. She was never truly free, not then, not now. A poet across the room drunkenly calls for a toast to Aphrodite. For without her, he slurs, none of us would be here, or happy. Everyone laughs. Thalia raises her cup politely, but doesn't drink. Her eyes flick toward a younger girl standing by the doorway, maybe 16, nervously adjusting her belt. Thalia excuses herself and walks over to the girl, whispering something that steadies her shoulders. You don't know what was said, but the gesture echoes louder than any speech. Here's a lesser-known detail. In Athens, Hetairai could sometimes become wealthy, manage their own households, buy slaves, even retire. One fragment tells of a woman named Nanion who later ran her own school for courtesans. But these stories are rare. Most Hetairai faded into obscurity when their looks waned or their patrons died. Some were quietly resold into lower-tier brothels. Others disappeared entirely. Beauty bought time but never security. And the scholarly debates? Oh, they're endless. Some argue Hetairai were feminist icons, pushing back against a rigid system with wit and charm. Others say that's modern romanticizing, and at the end of the day, they were still functioning within a deeply exploitative structure. Were they empowered, trapped, resilient, manipulative? The answer is probably all of the above, tangled together like ivy around a crumbling column. By the 3rd round of wine, the symposium has shifted tone. The debates are louder, the jokes darker, the body language sloppier. One man starts singing about the 5 types of women, and everyone laughs a little too hard. You glance over and see Thalia watching the room with her eyes that look ancient, not tired, just aware. She's reading every gesture, planning every move. She knows how this ends, and so do you. When you leave, the air outside feels cool, sobering. You walk back toward the city centre under a sky full of indifferent stars. The path is quiet, except for the clink of sandals and the distant bark of a dog. You think of Thalia's careful hands on the lyre strings, of Aspasia's sharp mind behind the veil of scandal, of that younger girl with the trembling fingers. They're not just survivors. They're storytellers, ghosts, chess masters on a rigged board. But even chess masters get tired. You reach your stoa, wrap your cloak tighter, and lie back on the stone. The garden party echoes in your mind, wine, words, laughter. And somewhere beneath it all, the sound of a woman tuning her lyre and waiting to be heard. The morning haze in Athens feels heavier today, thick with the scent of damp limestone and last night's wine still evaporating from the city's pores. You walk slower now. Maybe it's fatigue, or maybe it's that creeping weight of knowing too much. Everywhere you look, the faces of women, those who smile, those who stare blankly, those who avoid your gaze entirely, seem more vivid now, impossible to ignore. But today, you've got one name in your mind, a name that refuses to sit quietly in the footnotes of history. Aspasia. You've heard her name whispered in side conversations and shouted in comedy plays, used as both insult and compliment. But who was she really? A high-class prostitute? A philosopher's muse? A political puppet master? Depends who you ask, or more importantly, which dead man wrote the version you're reading. You're walking through the bustling district near the Knicks, where political assemblies roar and philosophies collide. Somewhere beneath the dusty hum of street chatter, you pick up a conversation about Aspasia. 2 men, one young, one greying and self-satisfied, are debating whether she should be banned from the agora for corrupting Athenian morals. The older one calls to her that foreign temptress. The younger one chuckles, then quotes her. Not Plato, not Pericles, her. The irony is thicker than olive paste. You keep walking. Eventually you reach a modest but well-kept home tucked behind an olive grove. According to half-reliable maps and even less reliable rumours, this was once her residence, shared openly with the Pericles, Athens' golden boy of statesmanship. They never married, not legally. She was a metic, a non-citizen, and the law forbade such unions. But still, she was his partner, mother of his son, and, allegedly, the editor of his most famous speeches. You're not here for marble busts or gilded mosaics. You're here to feel the dust between your fingers. To imagine what kind of power a woman must wield to be feared in a city designed to ignore her entirely. And Aspasia was feared, not because she was loud, though she could be, not because she was beautiful, though sources say she was. She was feared because she was intelligent, persuasive, and impossible to control, a philosopher in her own right. Socrates himself reportedly admired her, even claimed to have learned from her. One surviving anecdote has her correcting the logic of the most famous men in Athens while calmly arranging her robes. Still, Athens didn't honour her. They mocked her. The comic playwright Aristophanes turned her into a punchline more than once, accusing her of causing the Peloponnesian War by starting a dispute with Megara, allegedly over some prostitutes. Think about that. A woman blamed for sparking a massive war, not because she wielded an army, but because she was seen as wielding a man. And not just any man, Pericles himself. You sit for a moment beneath a fig tree that might be older than any building here, chewing on dried olives from a vendor's stall. You picture her here, brushing dust from her sandals, arguing about the soul with Socrates, drafting speeches that would echo through history while simultaneously being erased from it. A walking paradox, revered and reviled, visible and invisible, woman and force of nature. And here's the hard truth, no writings of hers survive. Not one. All we know of Aspasia comes from the words of men, some who hated her, some who loved her, all of whom tried to define her on their terms. She's remembered not as herself, but as a reflection of others. It's like trying to reconstruct a person from shadows on the wall. Still, the shadow is sharp. She hosted salons where philosophy and politics mixed in with art and flirtation. Men came to debate, to learn, to brag. She presided over these meetings like a conductor. She wasn't there to serve drinks. She was the mind that shaped the mood, steered conversations, challenged egos. Unlike most women in Athens, she was seen, heard, feared. You pass a pair of young women near a public fountain. One mentions Aspasia's name in a hushed tone. The other scoffs. She thought she was a man, she says, trying to sound dismissive. But there's a twinge of admiration buried in the contempt. You wonder how many girls like them grow up seeing only two options. Fade into a marriage you didn't choose, or gamble your entire life on charm and intellect, hoping to become the next Aspasia. Spoiler, almost none succeed. Here's a quirky historical nugget. There's a story, disputed of course, that after Pericles' death, Aspasia became involved with another prominent man, Lysicles, and helped him rise politically too. This has led some to speculate that she was essentially Athens' first unofficial campaign advisor. Others say she was just latching onto the next power source. Either way, she wasn't done when Pericles died. She wasn't the kind to vanish quietly. But what happened to her in the end? Nobody's sure. Some say she retired. Others say she faded into obscurity. No tomb has been definitively identified. No statue, no lasting inscription. Just that name ricocheting through literature and legend. Usually accompanied by a shrug or a sneer. Scholars argue about her legacy with the same energy people argue about whether pop stars are artists or products. Some claim she was a proto-feminist, breaking through a glass ceiling that barely existed. Others say she was simply a smart courtesan, who knew how to keep the right men wrapped around her finger. The truth is, we'll never know. What we do know is that she terrified a city run by men who didn't believe women should speak in public. And she did it anyway. As the day fades, you walk past a small shrine tucked into a stone wall, with offerings left at its base. Coins, bits of ribbon, even a wax tablet inscribed with a few hopeful lines of poetry. The inscription says it's for a woman of wisdom. It doesn't name her. Maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe that's what Aspasia is now, not a person, but a symbol for every woman who lived too loudly for her time. You sit again in the grass above the city, the lights of the agora flickering below like fireflies. You think about how history treats powerful women, not kindly, not fairly, but sometimes not completely. Sometimes their names slip through the cracks, impossible to crush, still whispered, still misunderstood, still haunting. And somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the records, Aspasia might be smiling because, after everything they did to silence her, you're still talking about her. You find yourself in the agora at mid-morning when the stone pavement is already warm beneath your feet and the market hums with the business of daily life. It's the nerve centre of Athens, this place, teeming with philosophers, merchants, beggars, actors, pickpockets, priests. Ideas get traded here right alongside barley and fish guts. But today, your focus isn't on the debates happening under colonnades or the smell of fresh thyme rising from the spice stalls. You're watching a crowd form near a low platform, the kind used for auctions. Not of olives, not amphorae, people. You edge closer, the buzz of voices thickening. Men are gathered in a loose half circle, most with hands behind their backs, eyes evaluating, calculating. On the platform, a young girl stands barefoot, knees pressed tightly together. She's no older than 12, wearing a short chiton that doesn't reach her knees. Her hair is braided simply, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance, trying not to blink too much. There's a faint mark on her arm, maybe a bruise, maybe a brand. The auctioneer is already deep into his pitch, praising her teeth, her youth, her docility. He claims she's from Thrace or maybe Phrygia, he's not certain. Doesn't speak Greek yet, he says with a chuckle, but she'll learn. They all do. A man in a purple-trimmed himation snorts and raises 2 fingers. The bidding begins. You don't breathe. You don't move. This isn't history tucked into the footnotes. This is now real, raw and practiced. You watch as the girl is sold for less than the price of a donkey, handed over like a loaf of bread. No paperwork, no ceremony. She's led away by the arm, stumbling slightly as her new owner talks over her head to his companion, already discussing which house to place her in. And that's just the start. Next comes a taller girl, maybe 16, with wider hips and better Greek. The auctioneer boasts that she's broken in, a phrase that burns as it lands. She's marked as a house slave, but the look in her eyes, disconnected, too calm, is one you've started to recognise. She's already been sold before. She knows how this goes. You wonder how many girls pass through this platform every week. Dozens? Hundreds? It depends on the season, the wars, the demand. During boom times, slave traders make a killing. During lean years, even local families sell their daughters to clear debts. You hear whispers that it's become so normalised. Some families treat it like a job opportunity. A nice home in Athens, they say. Regular meals, even training. As if being trained in this context is anything but soul-eroding. One of the men beside you casually mentions a new brothel opening up in Piraeus. They'll want fresh faces, he says, as if ordering fish. Especially young ones. The foreigners prefer them scared. You glance at him, but he's already moved on to examining the next girl, blonde, pale-skinned, trembling. No older than your cousin. No older than you were when you first started caring about how the world works. And here's the messed up twist. The auction is entirely legal. The government gets a cut, it's taxed, regulated, even recorded in some dusty official ledger. No one's hiding this. No one's even pretending to be embarrassed. This is business. Occasionally a higher class girl is brought out, one labelled as suitable for companionship, which is the euphemism used when they mean hetero material. Educated, attractive, pliable. These girls fetch higher prices, especially if they've been taught to sing, play lyre, or recite Homer without an accent. Their paths lead to villas and symposiums, not dockside cages, but don't mistake that for kindness. It's just a different flavour of ownership. Some scholars argue the market wasn't always this ruthless. That earlier Athenian society had stricter regulations on slave treatment, or that certain sanctuaries allowed for some kind of appeal or asylum. But others scoff at that. Even if protections existed, they were barely enforced, especially for foreign girls. In the end, it was all about supply and demand. And in a city full of men with rigid views of marriage and terrifying appetites for control, the demand was never in short supply. You watch as one girl, maybe out of instinct, maybe out of raw fear, tries to run. She bolts off the platform, slipping past the stunned auctioneer and ducking between 2 guards. For a second, the crowd freezes. Hope flares. But then, a man grabs her roughly by the hair, yanks her to the ground and drags her back, face down, in the dust. She doesn't scream, she doesn't fight, just goes limp. The auctioneer doesn't miss a beat. This one's spirited, he says with a grin, but give her a week. The men laugh. You want to scream? You want to punch someone? Instead, you turn away, bile climbing up your throat. The city hums on, indifferent. You drift from the auction platform in a daze, legs moving automatically toward the outskirts of the agora. There, Under the shade of an old plane tree, you find a smaller crowd gathered around a woman holding up what looks like a small wax tablet. She's reciting something, a poem. Her voice is clear, rhythmic, hypnotic, a love story, or maybe a prayer. For a moment, you forget where you are, then you realise she's not free either. She's advertising herself, offering poetry for sale, but also company. She's older, maybe 30, dressed in a worn but neat robe. Her eyes meet yours. They're tired but sharp, not beaten, not yet. You leave a coin at her feet and walk on, the words of her poem echoing behind you like a ghost trying to hitch a ride. And here's a strange, debated fragment for you. Some ancient records hint at a rare practice where enslaved prostitutes could, if they saved enough money, buy their own freedom. It wasn't common, it wasn't easy, but it happened. One stone inscription tells of a girl who earned enough over 10 years to purchase her liberty, only to be taxed for it and later re-enslaved by a different owner. Freedom in this world was often temporary. A brief gasp before the water closed over your head again. The sun is higher now, casting sharper shadows. The auction is winding down, but the consequences ripple outward. Somewhere in the city, a girl is being bathed and perfumed for her first night. Somewhere else, another is scrubbing a floor, waiting for her name to be called. They'll be forgotten by history, names lost, stories dissolved into silence. But you remember, and as you sit near the edge of the Agra, watching life go on as if nothing happened, you realise something bitter and true. Athens, the gleaming city of intellect, democracy and progress, was always built on stolen lives. And the market, whether it sold olives or children, never really closed. You're moving slowly now, as if the weight of everything you've seen is starting to settle in your bones. The city hasn't changed, not in any visible way. The agora still pulses with chatter. The temples still glint in the sun like invitations to something holier than this world offers. And the street vendors still shout about honey cakes like they're announcing miracles. But you've changed. You're starting to see the cracks in the marble. And today you're going inside one of the strangest and most telling institutions in Athens, a state-run brothel. Yes, you heard that right. Not a shady backroom operation. Not some rogue businessman exploiting the gaps in the law. This place is on the books, an officially sanctioned and taxed enterprise, managed by public officials and designed in theory to keep the citizens happy, the streets orderly, and the appetites of Athenian men properly drained. You find the entrance off a busy street near the edge of the Keramikos district. It's nothing fancy, a squat two-story building with faded paint and the faint odour of burning oil and unwashed bodies wafting out from the doorway. Above the entrance is a small sign, not a name, not a symbol, just the going rate, 1 obol. So low it feels insulting even before you step inside. The first thing you notice is the noise, not moaning or laughter or even conversation, just movement. A low rustle of bodies, footsteps, breathing. The quiet rhythm of a place running like a machine. A woman passes by carrying a bucket. Another is lighting a lamp with a practiced flick of her fingers. Neither of them looks at you. The interior is laid out like a barracks. Rooms line the sides of a narrow hall, each with thin partitions and simple curtains. There's no privacy, no locks, each space is the same. A straw mattress, a wooden stool and a jar of cheap perfume. The floors are damp. The smell is impossible to describe, like sweat and mould and regret all stewing together in a shallow bowl. You stop near one doorway and catch a glimpse of a girl sitting cross-legged on the bed, folding a piece of cloth with methodical precision. She can't be more than 17. Her skin is pale, hair dark, eyes unfocused. She folds, refolds, smooths the edges, then starts again. A man brushes past you, tosses a coin on the stool and pulls the curtain closed behind him. The coin clinks against the wood. The cloth falls from her lap. She doesn't say a word. You're told that the women here are all property of the state, enslaved, most of them. Though some may be born into it, inherited from mothers who never escaped. Others arrive as punishment, debtors, runaways, or even free women accused of crimes and given the choice between imprisonment or prostitution. And here's the dark kicker. The money they earn doesn't go to them. It goes to the city treasury. Some historians claim that the profits from these brothels were used for public works, roads, fountains, maybe even temple repairs. You can almost imagine the public debates. Should we install a new aqueduct or open another brothel? And really, it's not a joke. A fragment from an ancient orator suggests that Solon, Athens' famous lawgiver, not only legalized prostitution but intentionally made it accessible to all citizens to maintain public morals. Affordable vice to protect virtue. You know, civic budgeting. Of course, scholars argue about whether Solon truly supported state-run brothels, or if later writers just pinned it on him for convenience. Either way, the institution existed, and people used it, a lot. You move to the central chamber, a wide room where the girls wait between clients. It's not a lounge, no wine, no laughter, no philosophical debates, just silence. A few women rest their heads against the wall. One scratches her ankle, another is brushing out her hair with a broken comb. It's the stillness that gets you. Like everyone's holding their breath, waiting for the next knock. And here's something that stays with you. One of the girls is muttering under her breath, barely audible. You lean in and realize she's repeating the same phrase in a language you don't understand, over and over. A prayer? A mantra? A memory? It's hard to know, but the rhythm is hypnotic. It's the only thing that sounds like hope in this place. You step into the rear courtyard, where sunlight cuts across the ground in harsh rectangles. There's a trough for water, a few old cushions, and a cat that blinks at you lazily, before disappearing through a hole in the wall. One of the workers, a woman older than the rest, maybe in her 40s, sits sharpening a knife. Not for protection, for peeling vegetables. She's been here for decades, you're told. Knows the place better than anyone. She gives you a once-over and says flatly, "They think we're ghosts, but ghosts can't feel pain." You sit with her for a while, not talking, just listening. She tells you that the girls here come and go, some die, some are sold. Some get lucky and are taken in by a patron who keeps them as a private mistress, until they're too old, and then they come back. It's a circle, she says, slicing through a turnip with surgical precision. The men go out and fight wars, the girls just fight to stay human. There's one final detail she offers that chills you more than anything else. Some of the girls, she says, leave behind carvings, little symbols scratched into the walls of their rooms. Not names, not words, just marks. A flower, a handprint, a crescent moon. Tiny things to say I was here, I mattered. The city may not remember them, but the stone might. You leave the brothel with that image burned into your mind. A scratched flower on a crumbling wall. A private rebellion against being forgotten. The streets outside feel louder, brighter, almost offensive. You pass a group of young men laughing about last night's escapades, slapping each other on the back. They pass you without a glance, already planning their next visit. And you wonder, how many men walked into that building thinking they were just fulfilling a biological need? How many told themselves it was normal, expected, even honourable? How many brought gifts? How many brought shame? Athens prides itself on being the cradle of Western civilization, the birthplace of reason, democracy and art. But here, behind the rational debates and marble statues, is a city quietly devouring the people it deems expendable. And the worst part, it calls it justice. It calls it order. You find a quiet corner beneath a fig tree, sit down and try to slow your breathing. Somewhere nearby a rooster crows, a bell rings, life continues. But for the girls inside that brothel, time stands still, every hour the same, every face forgettable, every moment owned by someone else. You close your eyes and try to forget what you've seen, but you won't. You return to the main streets of Athens in a daze, not quite ready to engage with the bustling energy around you. The sun is high, casting sharp-edged shadows under the porticos, and everywhere, people are moving with purpose, shopping, arguing, walking dogs that look like they've been around since the Trojan War. But something's off. Not in the city. In you. The brothel's still clinging to your skin like soot. And then, as if the city can read your thoughts, a scent hits your nose. Something sharp, sweet, familiar, scented oil. It comes from a stall nestled between a fishmonger and a pottery shop. Glass bottles glint in the light, filled with amber, rose, saffron, and something darker, maybe myrrh. The seller is a woman with a voice like silken knives, demonstrating how a few drops of oil applied to the wrist can change everything. She dabs a bit behind her ear and raises her eyebrows as a passing man immediately slows his pace. He doesn't even realize he's turning his head. You buy nothing, but the smell stays with you as you keep walking, and suddenly you start noticing it everywhere, on passers-by, in the folds of tunics, lingering in the air near brothel doors and wine shops. Scent in this city is a kind of advertisement. It says you're worth noticing. You're open for business. You're selling something. In ancient Athens, perfume isn't just for the wealthy, it's layered into social customs, rituals, even sex work. Prostitutes, especially those in brothels, were often drenched in perfume, not as a luxury, but as a branding tool. You'd walk into a room and smell them before you saw them. It was meant to entice, to lure, but also to distinguish them from respectable women, who wore little to no fragrance. The scent was both mask and marker, a neon sign in oil form. Of course, this leads you to the next cruel twist. Because while perfume was used to attract clients, it was also used as evidence of shame. If a woman smelled too good, men would joke she was selling something. Smelling nice became suspicious. If a woman wore too much perfume in public, she might be fined, or worse, accused of prostitution, even if she wasn't one. There was no winning. You turned down a street filled with bathhouses and paused to watch a group of women leaving one. They're laughing, towels slung over their shoulders, hair pinned up. It's the first real joy you've seen in days. But then a man standing nearby mutters something under his breath. A word you don't quite catch, but the tone is unmistakable. Judging, dismissing, reducing, and just like that, the joy feels endangered again. You head toward the altar of Aphrodite, a small shrine tucked between two streets, its stone steps worn down from generations of soft-footed pilgrims. There's a line of offerings, flowers, ribbons, little clay votives shaped like body parts. Breasts mostly, hips, a few phalluses too, because subtlety was never Aphrodite's style. The whole place smells like incense, smoke and, you guessed it, scented oil. The priestess on duty watches you quietly. She's older than you expected, with sharp eyes and sun-worn skin. Her robe is clean but simple. You drop a coin into the offering dish and ask her, hesitantly, if many prostitutes come here. She doesn't flinch. Aphrodite accepts all who honour her, she says. The city may reject them, but the goddess does not. It's a comfort, sort of. But then she adds something that sits in your chest like a cold stone. Of course, she says, Aphrodite also punishes those who abuse beauty. Some men forget that. You want to believe her, but it's hard after everything you've seen. There's a story, one of those ancient half-truths wrapped in myth, that the city once passed a law requiring prostitutes to wear special clothing in public, distinctive sandals, bright robes, even bells around their ankles. Imagine that, being so determined to control someone's shame that you make it ring with every step. Some scholars say it's real, others say it's exaggerated satire from the comic playwrights. You don't know. Either way, it sounds exactly like something Athens would do. And while we're on the subject of shame, here's a law for you. If a man is caught sleeping with another man's wife, he can be killed without trial. If he's caught with a prostitute, it's just a fine, a shrug. In fact, some speeches from the courts actually justify patronising prostitutes as a civic good, preventing adultery, keeping women pure, maintaining social order. It's a weird brand of logic, like eating mouldy bread to avoid going hungry. You pass a wall covered in graffiti. Most of it's vulgar. Drawings of male anatomy, crude slogans, half-erased names, but one carving stops you. It's simple, just the word Euraleia inside a heart. Maybe it was carved by a client, maybe a lover. Maybe she carved it herself. A tiny permanent whisper in a city full of yelling. You're starting to see it now. The city doesn't just regulate the bodies of these women, it regulates their presence, their scent, their volume, their walk. Everything about them is designed to be visible and invisible at the same time, seen when needed, erased when inconvenient. You duck into a wine shop to rest your legs. The owner, a wiry man with olive-stained fingers, is chatting with a customer about the latest gossip. Apparently a prominent Athenian was caught sleeping with his slave and then tried to pass her off as a free woman to avoid scandal. The joke, they say, is that if she'd been a prostitute, no one would care. The city only panics when a woman breaks her designated box, and that brings you to the core contradiction of all this. Athens sees prostitution as essential but disgraceful, normal but disgusting, public but secret. Men are allowed to indulge, even expected to. But women are expected to carry the burden of their own exploitation like it's a civic duty. By the time you step back out onto the street, the sun has started to dip. The smell of dinner, roasted lamb, garlic, coriander, drifts out of open windows. Somewhere a flute plays, somewhere else someone is lighting a lamp in a room that smells like rose oil and dried tears. You walk on, the scent clinging to your tunic like a memory you didn't ask for. You think of the perfume at the auction, the smell in the state brothel, the incense at Aphrodite's shrine. All those layers of fragrance trying to cover up a truth that never really fades. Beauty in this city is currency, but it comes at a cost. And most of the women who pay it, they don't even get to keep the receipt. The road winds upward, away from the din of the agora and the sticky haze of perfume, leading you towards something quieter, older and stranger. You've heard whispers about Delphi, about priestesses and prophecy, gods and gold, and a kind of worship that doesn't quite fit into the polished narrative Athens likes to sell. So you follow the trail, past hills that roll like sleeping giants, past shepherds humming tuneless songs, past olive groves so still they feel painted. And then, rising out of the rock like a secret unfolding, there it is, the Temple of Apollo Delphi. It's beautiful. In that way only ancient things can be, half crumbling, half defiant, always whispering that it knows something you don't. You pass the treasuries of long-dead cities, each flaunting their wealth in stone offerings, and follow the sacred way to the temple steps. But your interest isn't just in Apollo. You're here for the women, specifically the Pythia, the oracle. She sits at the centre of the world, or so the myths claim, speaking for the gods, breathing in the sacred vapours that rise from a fissure in the earth. People travel for days, months even, to ask her questions. They bring gold, sheep, cakes, and most importantly, desperation. War generals, kings, farmers, they all want the same thing: certainty. And she gives it to them, wrapped in riddles, heavy with symbolism. But here's the thing they never taught you in school. The oracle is a woman, a real, living woman. And depending on the era, she might be old and celibate, or young and something else entirely. You walk into the temple, escorted by a priest who looks like he's aged in dog years. The air is cool, almost damp. The smell is mineral and incense, with an undercurrent of something sour. Maybe the chasm itself, maybe your nerves. You don't get to see the Pythia, not directly. She's behind a veil, seated on a tripod, chanting. The sound is rhythmic, slow, like someone trying to hold a note and a secret at the same time. The priest translates, or claims to. It's hard to tell how much is divine inspiration and how much is political scripting. You ask a question, something harmless, vague. Will Athens flourish? The priest tilts his head, listens, then recites something about an olive tree blooming on the bones of the past. Sure, okay. But behind the theatre, you're thinking about the woman herself, about what it means to be a voice for the gods in a world that doesn't even let women vote. The oracle is revered, yes, but also isolated. Controlled. Her words are sacred, but her life heavily managed. She's housed by the male priests. Her access to the world outside the temple is limited. Her power is conditional, and depending on the century, the role of the oracle has changed drastically. In earlier times, the Pythia was often a young virgin, chosen specifically for her beauty and purity. But after rumours, some say real, others say propaganda, of her being taken advantage of by powerful men, the priesthood began choosing older women instead. They dressed them like virgins, but the message was clear. This is sacred, not sensual. Translation, stop treating our prophet like a prostitute. But that line, the one between priestess and prostitute, was never clear in ancient Greece, especially in places like Corinth, or in parts of Delphi, where temple prostitution, yes, the literal sacred selling of the sex, was rumoured to be part of the ritual practice. Some say it was symbolic, others say literal. Some say it was rare, others say it was institutional. Scholars still argue about it over stale coffee and too many scrolls. There's one particularly spicy account by the historian Herodotus, grain of salt always, describing the practice of hierodouloi, or sacred servants, who may have offered sex as a religious act. According to this theory, certain temples, especially those devoted to Aphrodite, employed women, and sometimes men, to engage in ritual intercourse with worshippers. The goal wasn't pleasure, it was devotion, fertility, communion with the divine. Well, that's what they said. Functionally, it blurred the line between worship and exploitation beyond recognition. Delphi, though not primarily associated with Aphrodite, wasn't immune to the rumours. And while most modern historians caution against taking those claims too literally, there's enough smoke to suggest at least a few small fires. Was sex ever traded in these sacred walls? Maybe not openly, but power was. And power in this world almost always comes wrapped in gendered expectations. You step out of the temple and follow a stone path that winds toward a smaller shrine, one less guarded, less watched. You find two women sitting on the steps, both dressed in faded robes, their hair pinned back in messy buns. They're not priestesses, not anymore. You sit nearby, pretending to adjust your sandal and listen. One of them, voice low and dry, says, "She screamed again today, said the god was burning her tongue." The other nods. They'll say it was ecstasy, it was a seizure. They talk like nurses, like survivors, like women who've seen too much and are now expected to forget. They mention herbs, vapour, laurel leaves, and something else. An underground room sealed during the off-season. It's hard to piece together, but the image is unmistakable. A woman, placed on a seat above a crack in the earth, inhaling gas and being told she is divine, whether she believes it or not. And it hits you. Even sacred women in this world are still used. Whether by priests who need an answer, by politicians who want a convenient prophecy, or by commoners desperate for hope, the oracle isn't free. She's trapped in mythology, in ritual, in everyone else's projections. She's divine when it suits them, disposable when it doesn't. As you leave Delphi, the mountain air feels sharper, cleaner, but you carry something heavy with you. Not sadness exactly, not anger either. Just a sense of how thoroughly this world wraps women in roles they didn't choose. Priestess, prostitute, prophet, pleasure, purity, all blurred into one exhausting costume. You pass a group of travellers heading toward the temple, hopeful expressions on their faces, clutching tiny offerings. One of them, a young man with dirt under his fingernails, whispers that he's going to ask the oracle about marriage, whether the girl he loves will say yes. He looks terrified. He looks hopeful. He looks like he still believes in answers. And maybe that's the cruelest thing. The oracle will give him something, a riddle. Oh. A poem, a cryptic promise. But behind the curtain, behind the incense and ceremony, a woman will whisper those words, half-drugged, barely seen. You descend the hill in silence, the temple shrinking behind you. The wind picks up, carrying a scent of laurel, ash, and faintly oil. Always the oil. Back in Athens, the sun hangs low and heavy, casting long shadows across the Acropolis. The marble glows like bone, and the streets buzz with the slow unravelling of another day. Merchants packing up, donkeys grunting, boys skipping stones in dried-out gutters. You're lingering at the edge of a small public square where men are gathered around a tax collector's table, arguing over grain weights and shipment duties. It's loud, boring and aggressively male, until someone mutters something about the pornikon telos, and your ears perk up. That phrase, it means the sex tax, a literal state-imposed tax on prostitution. You sidle closer to the table, pretending to study a chipped amphora, while your brain goes full eavesdrop mode. One of the men, a greasy-haired clerk with ink-stained fingers, complains that collections are down this quarter. The brothel on the west side closed, he says. Too many sick girls. They couldn't keep up. Another responds, half laughing, "Just raise the rates. You know they'll pay. No one wants to go home to their wife." You have to steady yourself against a pillar. The pornikon telos wasn't just some random fee. It was a well-oiled part of the Athenian budget, designed to ensure that the state profited off every transaction of flesh right down to the last obol. Every prostitute, pimp, madam and brothel owner owed the state a cut, like a grotesque franchise fee. And while there were other taxes on olive oil, wine, foreign merchants, none were quite as cynically effective. Sex, after all, never went out of season. You walk through the neighbourhood known for its clusters of entertainment houses, a cleaner word than brothels, but everyone knows what they are. Outside one, you spot a scribbled list nailed to the wall. Names, numbers, dates. It's not in code, it's a tax record, listing the girls, the days they worked, and what they earned. The numbers are brutal. Some names are crossed out, gone, sold, dead, who knows, and new ones added in crude handwriting. The math keeps moving. The girls, too. There's sick genius to it. The state, by taxing the brothels, could fund its own infrastructure. Roads, temples, even naval expeditions. There's an old, likely exaggerated legend that the great walls of Athens, those thick, proud fortifications, were built with tax money collected from prostitutes. Imagine that. Men marching off to war, protected by walls literally paid for with the suffering of enslaved girls. Every brick mortared with someone else's silence. You turn into a quieter street, and there you see a small booth where a man, slouched, half asleep, is stamping clay tokens. A passerby drops a coin on the table and gets a token in return. You ask what it's for, feigning the kind of casual ignorance that keeps you from being chased away. "Prepaid visit," the man says without looking up. You show it at the door, faster than counting change out, and your pants are already off. The token system was meant to standardize everything. Tokens with Aphrodite's symbol, or crude carvings of the services offered, were used in some brothels like ancient coupons. You pay in advance, get your token, hand it to the girl, or more likely the madam, and go on your way. It's all so transactional, so numbingly efficient, like a meat counter with less dignity. You can't stop thinking about how the girls themselves must have felt, watching clients pay taxes on their bodies as if they were grain or marble. And knowing none of that money ever reached them, they were assets, not workers, not even people, just profit centers. As you walk, you overhear an older man bragging to a group of younger ones about how he discovered a girl before she was taxed. "They hadn't registered her yet," he says smug, "so I got a night for free. After that, she was too expensive." The boys laugh, all nodding like this is good business sense. This is the part the textbooks tend to skip. Athens, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theatre, also pioneered the monetization of sex in ways that would make modern corporations take notes. There's an argument to be made that the system protected some women from harsher fates by legalizing their trade. You've read those defenses, but walking these streets, breathing this air, watching lives be counted in coins and token stubs, you start to see through that illusion. And it's not just the brothel girls being taxed. Heteri too were often expected to pay fees, bribes, or protection money to officials. Even the most successful courtesans lived under constant threat of reclassification, being declared pornae and taxed accordingly. It was a power move wielded by enemies, jealous wives, or corrupt magistrates. Your status, your autonomy, your entire career could be undone with one accusation: the difference between elite entertainer and taxed prostitute. A few choice words spoken in the wrong room. You pass a small, well-maintained building that looks like a house. It's quiet, private, expensive. The kind of place where wealthier men would keep mistresses, courtesans they visited exclusively to avoid the shame of more public brothels. These arrangements were often unofficial marriages in everything but name. The girls lived in comfort, sometimes for years, but even here taxes were still collected. The state always got its share. Even in pleasure, the city demanded payment. And here's a quirky wrinkle. While the city taxed the prostitutes and their keepers, there was no formal tax on the clients. Men could visit brothels as often as they liked, spend as much or as little as they chose, and never pay a civic penalty beyond what they handed over for service. The burden of legality always landed on the women, because of course it did. A few oddball historians have debated whether this tax system might have offered a twisted form of legitimacy. Taxed meant acknowledged, they argue. And in some fringe cases, it even created a paper trail for women who later tried to buy their freedom. Evidence that they worked, that they earned, that they existed. But that's small comfort in a world that turned living bodies into revenue streams. As the sun dips lower, turning the white city gold, you make your way toward the hill above the agora where the wind finally cuts through the heat. From up here you can see the city's veins, alleys, rooftops, smoke rising from kitchens, the temple to Hephaestus glowing softly. And below it all, somewhere, the tax booths are still open, the tokens still being handed out, the names still being crossed off or added. Business doesn't stop at sundown. You sit in the grass, and the breeze carries the faint scent of cooked lamb and rose oil. It's almost beautiful. Almost. And yet you can't stop picturing a young girl counting her clients at the end of the day, then watching her earnings handed over to a man with a ledger, who will in turn hand it to a city official. She'll go to bed sore, silent and broke, knowing that her pain helped keep the city clean, the aqueduct flowing, the temple floors swept. That's the price of civilization, they'd probably say. Everyone contributes, but only some bleed. You find yourself back near the law courts, that grand maze of dusty colonnades and marble benches, where Athens performs one of its favourite pastimes, suing the absolute hell out of each other. Legal disputes here aren't a last resort. They're sport. They're theatre. You pass men in clean tunics rehearsing speeches to themselves, practicing rhetorical flourishes and fake outrage with all the sincerity of bad actors in a tragic play. And today, the case drawing a crowd is one of those classics. Murder, infidelity and sex work all tangled into a moral pretzel. You slip into the crowd and get a spot near the front, leaning against a column warm from the sun. The defendant is already speaking. His name is Euphilitos, and his voice is calm, soothing, even as he recounts the events that led to the murder of a man named Eratosthenes. The room is dead quiet. "I killed him because he was in my wife's bed," he says. With all the emotional charge of someone reading off a shopping list, a few people nod, others exchange glances that say, "Seems fair." According to Athenian law, it actually was. Killing a man caught in the act of adultery wasn't considered murder. It was a defense of one's household, one's oikos, the private domain that included wife, children, slaves, and everything else a citizen was expected to control. Euphilito says he discovered the affair and set a trap, then caught the man and killed him on the spot. No denial, no remorse, just duty. But here's the kicker. Euphilitos could only get away with this because the woman involved, his wife, was considered a respectable woman, a citizen. Had the affair been with a hetera or a prostitute, different story entirely. No crime, no trial, just a sheepish shrug and maybe a laugh at the symposium later. You're watching a legal double standard in real time, and it's so baked into the culture that no one even blinks. The courtroom itself smells of sweat and dust and lingering incense from a shrine tucked into the far corner. There's a clay jug of water near the speaker's platform, not for hydration, but to time the speeches. Each man gets one fill. When the water runs out, so does his chance to be heard. Efficiency, Athenian style. Euphilites keeps going, painting himself as a victim of seduction, manipulation, betrayal. He blames Eratosthenes for everything. His voice wavers just enough to seem authentic. You start to notice, though, how little he says about his wife, except that she was corrupted. Not an actor in her own story, but a vessel, a thing to be defiled or protected. It's the same language they use for temples. And here's where it gets really tangled. Some scholars suggest that this case, immortalized in a speech attributed to the orator Lysias, was never about justice, it was performance. A moral stage play designed to remind Athenians what kind of behaviour was tolerable and what crossed the line. Eratosthenes crossed it by sleeping with a citizen wife. That was the mistake. Not lust, not lying, status violation. Meanwhile, you remember another story from earlier in the week, about a man who beat one of his slave girls to death because she refused a client. No trial, no speech, just a few whispered comments about discipline and property. She didn't have an oikos. No one sued for her honour. And yet, if she had been a prostitute who stepped out of line, she could be taken to court. Not for moral reasons, but for economic ones. Damaging a business, defrauding clients, or even dressing too well in public and confusing people into thinking she was a citizen. That's right. A prostitute wearing expensive clothing in the wrong part of town could be dragged into court for impersonation. Her crime, looking respectable. You walk through the agora later, and everywhere you turn the same paradox plays out. A woman can be mocked for being too modest, too free, too educated, too desirable, too independent, and always, always too visible. The ideal is simple. Be everything to a man, and nothing without one. There's a graffiti carving on a stone bench that sums it up with cruel precision. 3 kinds of women: wives for bearing, heterae for pleasure, slaves for everything else. It's not just an opinion. It's practically policy. And here's a strange little fact to chew on. In one of the lesser-known public decrees, there's mention of a proposal that would fine prostitutes for accepting gifts over a certain value. The fear was that a prostitute might use those gifts to amass wealth, and heaven forbid, influence. Some even worried that a particularly popular hetera could bribe officials or sway votes, so they proposed restrictions, not on the men who gave the gifts, but on the women who received them. Gotta love a system where generosity becomes a punishable offence, but exploitation is just economics. You walk past a courthouse where another case is being prepped. This time it's a woman, middle-aged, stately, accused of bewitching her lover with magic. Love potions, curses, wax dolls, the whole eerie package. You'll learn more about those soon. But right now, the thought that she needs to defend herself for controlling a man, while actual murder can be forgiven with a decent speech. It's infuriating, and yet no one else seems bothered. The vendors still shout, the philosophers still argue. The boys still chase each other around pillars pretending to be heroes. You sit at the edge of the square, feet aching, watching the city celebrate its laws with the same pride it celebrates its statues. They call it isonomia, equality under the law, but you know better now. For women, especially prostitutes, former prostitutes, suspected prostitutes, or anyone who looked too much like one, isonomia is a myth. A pretty word carved in stone while bodies are carved up in silence. The case of Euphilitus wraps up with a final appeal to virtue and family honour. The jury files out. No one seems worried. The outcome is expected. They'll probably let him walk. You wander off, mind full of echoes, down a narrow road lined with olive trees. You pass a girl sweeping the steps of a small shrine, her dress patched, her arms scarred. She looks at you once, briefly, then goes back to sweeping, not because she doesn't care, but because she already knows what the law will and won't do for her. And justice? Well, that's just another man with a loud enough voice and a jug of water. You wake to the distant clang of metal on stone, someone sharpening something, or maybe repairing a cartwheel, but your body is still heavy from yesterday. It's not physical exhaustion exactly, more like a hangover made of anger, disbelief, and a deep, numbing sadness. You roll up your thin blanket, shake the dust off your tunic, and decide to do something different today. No courts, no brothels, more. You want to find someone, anyone, who got out. That's easier said than done. Athens doesn't keep records of the women who escape prostitution. There are no official tallies, no honours, no statues. If they leave the trade, they vanish into anonymity or are reabsorbed into other roles. Servant, cook, concubine, wife. If they're lucky, if not. Back into the shadows they crawl from, with new bruises and fewer options. But today, rumour takes you toward a modest house on the slope of the Hill of the Nymphs. It's a plain structure, weathered stone small courtyard, an olive tree whose trunk is gnarled like a fist. You knock once and a woman opens the door. Not startled, not friendly either. Just curious. She sizes you up, then gestures you inside without a word. Her name is Cleonica. She doesn't offer that right away. It comes later. Somewhere between a bowl of lentils and a long, slow silence. She's in her mid-30s, maybe older, maybe just aged by the weight of survival. Her robe is clean but faded. Her hands are calloused. She sits like someone who doesn't owe you a damn thing. Eventually the conversation starts. And yes, she used to be a hetaira. Not a brothel girl, not a slave, but a high-class companion. She lived in a villa once, attended symposiums, danced for generals, debated with poets. I was good, she says simply, not boastfully. Too good. You ask why she left and she laughs. One too many clients who wanted to own me, she says. The better you are at pretending to be free, the more they want to trap you. One man tried to buy her. Another tried to marry her. Illegally, of course, because she wasn't a citizen. When she refused, he accused her of witchcraft. She fled before the trial. Now she grows herbs. She makes salves. Sometimes women come to her for advice, quietly. At night. She shows you a small drawer in her kitchen, filled with tiny wax figures, scraps of parchment, and beads tied with red thread. These, she says, are not spells. They're reminders. Of pain, of joy, of choices, of debts unpaid. A girl came here last week, she tells you. Barefoot, pregnant, said she'd swallowed nightshade. Germany, I gave her honey and water. She didn't die, so I suppose that's something. You sit in the courtyard with Cleonica for a while, watching the olive tree sway. She tells you names, first names only, of other women who escaped. One is living with a trader in Corinth now. Another joined a temple, posed as a widow, and now scrubs floors for coin. None of us get clean, Cleonica says, picking at the edge of her robe. We just stop bleeding. But not everyone escapes. Down in the lower district near the pottery workshops, you find another girl. Her name is Damaris. She's 17 maybe. She works in a small house run by a silent woman with sharp eyes and a fist like iron. You don't go inside, you don't need to. You sit on a broken column across the street and watch. Damaris comes out twice, once to empty a chamber pot, once to sweep the front step. Her wrists are thin, her eyes hollow. A man yells something at her from across the street. She flinches. You feel something in your chest tighten like a snare. Later you manage to speak to her when she's outside alone. You don't ask the wrong questions, you just say hello, offer a bit of cheese and tell her you're visiting. She looks at the cheese like it's gold. You ask if she's been in the house long. She shrugs. Since I was 13, I think. And then she tells you something strange. I have a sister, she says. She got out. Went north with a merchant. Sent me a note once. Said there's a town where women live without masters. Her voice softens, like it's floating away. I don't know if it's real. You don't either. But it doesn't matter. The idea of escape is more powerful than escape itself. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps people alive. You leave her there, sweeping the same stone step, and head back toward Cleonica's house. On the way, you pass a shrine dedicated to Artemis, protector of women and girls. There's a small figure of a doe, a handful of barley, and oddly, an iron hairpin stuck into the soil like a knife. You don't ask who left it. You already know. And here's the thing historians still argue about. Were there actual support systems for women trying to leave prostitution in ancient Greece? Some say yes, temples, sympathetic patrons, even other women, like Cleonica, who took in the broken. Others say no, that once you were branded, you stayed branded, that the city had no interest in reabsorbing you as anything but entertainment. You want to believe the first version, but the evidence is thin, scattered, unreliable. Like everything else when it comes to women's stories. Back at Cleonica's house, she gives you a pouch of dried herbs. For sleep, she says, or for dreams. They'll taste bitter either way. You ask why she helps others. Why she hasn't just disappeared into peace. She shrugs. 'Cause someone helped me once. You nod. You thank her. She doesn't smile. On your way back down the hill, the city unfolds in front of you. Glittering white, bustling a proud... You know now that there are women tucked behind those walls, climbing out one scarred hand at a time. Not for justice, not for revenge, just to survive, to breathe, to maybe someday be forgotten on their own terms. Night falls harder than usual. The city hums like it's holding its breath, and the sky above is velvet black, pinpricked with stars that seem almost too bright, like they're watching. You're heading somewhere you've been warned about more than once. A party. An actual party. Not a symposium, not a performance in a room with scrolls and wine and Socratic monologues. No, this is the Bacchanal. A true Dionysian feast, the kind that's equal parts ritual and riot. You followed the flute music for almost an hour, winding through alleys until you reach a courtyard lit by torches that sputter and spit like they're drunk too. A gate swings open. You're waved in by a boy wearing nothing but ivy and a smirk. And once inside, it's like stepping into a different Athens, a sideways world. The air is thick with wine vapour and sweat. People dance draped in nothing but garlands and sheer fabric. There are drums, tambourines, someone playing a stringed instrument too fast, too loud. The floor is slick with spilled wine and crushed fruit. It smells like overripe figs, warm skin and smoke. And at the centre of it all there are women, laughing, shouting, shrieking with glee or rage, or maybe both. Not all of them are prostitutes. Not all of them are free either. Some are hetairai, well-dressed and playing flutes between sips of spiced wine. Others are lower-class girls from the edges of society, their dresses hanging off their shoulders, no shoes in sight. A few slaves sit on the edge of the room, eyes distant, waiting to be summoned. But here in this charged chaos, those lines blur fast. A man in a lion-skin cloak toasts to Dionysus and throws back a goblet the size of your face. A woman beside him pulls him down by the hair and kisses him with feral intensity. Another pair disappears behind a curtain. The moans that follow are immediate, shameless. And you're watching this storm unfold from the edge, sipping something sweet and sharp that might be wine or might be poison. A girl hands you a fig stuffed with cheese and honey, licking her fingers as she retreats into the shadows. It's hard to tell what's performance and what's impulse here, or if there's even a difference. And then someone starts telling a story. She stands up on a low platform, naked except for an ivy crown and gold bangles stacked up her arms. She introduces herself as Veronike, Victory Bringer. Her voice is loud, slurred, but clear enough to carry. She spins a tale about a woman who danced so beautifully that Dionysus himself appeared and gave her the gift of prophecy. The woman, of course, went mad. Her visions were too much. She wandered naked through the streets, shouting secrets about the city's leaders. Eventually the guards threw her in a wine jar and left her to die. Everyone laughs. You don't. Because that story isn't fiction, or at least not entirely. You've heard the rumour before that during one of the city's many feasts, a prostitute, maybe drunk, maybe possessed, danced too wildly, said too much, and ended up dead in a clay amphora outside the Diplon gate. Whether it was punishment or accident depends on who's telling the story, but the wine jar part, that shows up in more than one version. It becomes a joke, of course. Death by wine jar. A warning maybe, a punchline. The men at the party repeat it like it's a chant, but some of the women, they go quiet. Later in the night, when things have spilled over into pure carnality, you find a quiet corner beside a half-burnt brazier. A woman sits there, bare-legged, twirling a necklace of bees around her wrist. Her name is Melina. You don't ask if she's working, you just ask if she likes these gatherings. She shrugs. They're safer than being alone, she says, eyes on the fire. When everyone's drunk, they forget you're not one of them. That one lands heavy, because that's the undercurrent here. Beneath the wine, the music, the naked bodies pressed together like wet laundry. The danger never really leaves. It just waits, one wrong laugh. One wrong refusal, one wrong look, and suddenly you're the story they tell tomorrow. Or worse, the one they don't. Melina tells you about a girl last month who was offended, a wealthy man, by laughing at his poem. He pushed her into a brazier. Her dress caught fire. No charges were filed. He paid for the damages to the house and left her with enough coin for salve. She doesn't come to these anymore, Melina says. Not because she's scared, because her face melted. And here's the strange part. These bacchanals are technically sacred, dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine, pleasure, madness, and liberation. He was one of the few gods in the Greek pantheon who didn't seem to mind chaos. His rites were meant to unshackle you, to free you from rules, from roles, from control. In theory, but in practice, it's a pressure valve. One night of freedom in exchange for a lifetime of obedience. Like letting a caged animal stretch its legs before snapping the door shut again. Some scholars argue that these rituals were empowering for women, that by participating in Dionysian rites they could express forbidden parts of themselves, rage, lust, joy. Others say it was just another trap, that when the madness passed they were punished for how much they enjoyed it. You're still thinking about that when someone hands you a mask, lacquered wood, painted with a sly smile and thick lashes. You put it on, the world narrows, everything becomes shapes and sounds and heat. You feel a hand on your shoulder, then another. Then the mask is removed and you're face to face with a woman covered in gold dust, her eyes wild, her smile broken at the edges. Have you ever screamed into the sea? She asks. You shake your head. You should. It's the only thing that never talks back. And then she disappears into the crowd, leaving you with that little shard of poetry like a dagger in your pocket. By the time the party winds down, the floor is littered with broken cups and sleeping bodies. Someone is still playing the flute, but it's more like a lullaby now. You step over a snoring man curled around a lyre, find your sandals, and make your way outside. The city feels too still, too straight, like you've stepped out of a painting back into stone. You walk in silence, the mask still in your hand, the echo of that girl's voice still in your ears. You should scream into the sea, you might tomorrow, tonight though you'll settle for sleep. Morning comes with a headache and the taste of figs still clinging to your teeth. The city feels quieter today. Not in the literal sense. The same vendors are shouting, the same carts are squeaking down the same uneven stones, but there's something under the noise that makes you stop more often, listen harder, a weight that wasn't there before. You carry it with you as you walk past a row of shrines, each one dedicated to a different god or goddess, their carved faces peering down with chipped patience. There's Athena, of course, stern and strategic, the city's favoured daughter. Demeter, round-faced and earthy. Artemis, wild-eyed. But it's the one in the corner that pulls you in, Aphrodite. Her statue is smaller here, tucked into an alcove with rose petals scattered at the base, and little clay votives shaped like hands, eyes, genitals, yeah, it's all there. Her face is serene, head tilted like she knows more than she's saying, which she probably does. You've been thinking about her for days without realizing it. She's been in every oil-drenched brothel, every red-lipped smile, every court case and whispered prayer. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, desire, and, not so incidentally, sex, or rather sex as power, or sex as war, depending on who's telling the story. Because here's the strange thing, in ancient Athens, Aphrodite wasn't some passive symbol of romantic fluff. She was dangerous, tricky. She could bless a marriage or burn it to ash. She could elevate a woman or destroy her. And through her, the city found a way to frame the women they couldn't quite understand or control. You sit on the temple steps and think about how Aphrodite shows up in myth. There's Helen, of course, The face that launched 1,000 ships, blamed for a war that men started and finished. And there's Phaedra, who burned with forbidden desire and set ruin in motion. There's Medea, Circe, even Persephone, each tied to beauty, to sex, to chaos. All wrapped in Aphrodite's glow, all punished for it in some way. It's like the myths wanted to teach women one thing: if you're beautiful and clever, you'd better stay very, very quiet. But you also can't help thinking maybe these myths weren't just warnings, maybe they were excuses. Aphrodite becomes the divine scapegoat, the convenient alibi. Why did you fall in love with a prostitute? Aphrodite made you. Why did you destroy your household over lust? Blame the goddess, not yourself, never yourself. And here's where it gets even more twisted. Prostitutes in the Athens were often associated with Aphrodite, whether they wanted to be or not. There were temples to Aphrodite Pandemos, Aphrodite of the people, where prostitutes were said to make offerings. Some worked nearby, some were even considered sacred in certain cults. Whether these women were honoured or exploited is complicated. One man's holy rite is another woman's unpaid shift. You wander down to a larger temple dedicated to her, where the offerings are grander: perfume bottles, strings of pearls, cakes shaped like hearts. A man drops a coin and asks for success in love. A woman drops a different coin and asks for her husband to stop visiting other women. No one laughs, the goddess is listening. You think back to that strange debate among historians, some arguing that the worship of Aphrodite actually empowered prostitutes by connecting them to something divine, that in honouring her they claimed back their agency. Others say no, that it was a facade, a way for men to decorate the system of exploitation with pretty stories and flowers. And you think, why not both? Maybe the girls in the brothels whispered to Aphrodite when no one else would listen. Maybe they left her gifts: combs, earrings, broken bits of mirror, hoping she'd grant them something better. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. You remember the woman at the Dionysian feast, covered in gold dust, whispering about screaming into the sea. You think about Cleonica, sharpening her herbs like weapons. Damaris, sweeping the same step every day. Thaleia, with her practiced wit. And Aspasia, dangerous. Oh, brilliant, unforgettable. These women all wielded beauty like a blade, whether by choice or by survival. Aphrodite was never just about love. She was the patron goddess of power disguised as charm, of influence wrapped in perfume and laughter and dangerous eyes. And it wasn't just women. Men feared her too. She could twist their thoughts, ruin their ambitions, turn a statesman into a poet or a soldier into a lovesick wreck. A few ancient philosophers wrote whole treatises warning about her, some disguised as theology, others as moral advice. But underneath the poetry you could smell the fear. There's even a quirky legend, probably apocryphal, definitely delicious, about a politician who tried to ban prostitutes from making offerings at Aphrodite's shrine. He claimed it was offensive to the goddess. Within a year he lost his fortune, was caught in a scandal involving 2 boys and a goat, and died choking on a grape. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the goddess keeps receipts. You walk through the temple garden, the scent of roses thick and heady in the air. There's a carved plaque on the wall. She who gives love gives pain. It's not a warning, it's a statement of fact. You find a small bench and sit under a laurel tree, the leaves rustling like gossip. You close your eyes and picture the girls again, not as victims, not just as survivors, but as people carrying Aphrodite inside them like a fire they were never allowed to set loose. And you wonder, not for the first time, what it would look like if the myths had ended differently. If Helen sailed herself across the sea, if Medea had started her own kingdom instead of a bloodbath, if the goddesses weren't just foils for men's stories but full forces in their own right. Maybe that's what the girls at the temple were really praying for. Not love, not escape, just space. To be real, to be flawed, to be powerful without being punished. You rise as the wind shifts, carrying the scent of roses and olive smoke down into the city. The statue of Aphrodite watches you leave, serene as ever, not judging, not blessing, just watching, and maybe, just maybe, waiting for her daughters to rewrite the script. There's a part of the city most people don't mention, unless they're trying to scare children or insult their neighbour's wife. It doesn't have a name, exactly, not one written on maps, but if you ask the right people in the right tone, they'll point you toward a cluster of crooked homes and faded doorways near the edge of the cemetery district. You follow those half instructions now, down a path so narrow your elbows brush the walls on both sides. It smells like dust, old wax, and something metallic. The sun doesn't quite reach here. You could swear the shadows move. You're looking for a love spell workshop. No, really. Because among all the tools used by prostitutes and courtesans to stay alive, charm, wit, perfume, manipulation, there's another, quieter weapon. Magic. Or at least the belief in it. And in this cramped room behind a curtain that smells like damp herbs and anxiety, you meet the kind of person no one admits they visit. She calls herself a glaze. Her eyes are pale and clouded, her hair a nest of grey threads, and her fingers permanently stained from handling lead and ash. She doesn't ask why you're here, just gestures to a cushion on the floor and returns to her work, scratching tiny letters into a sheet of lead with a bone stylus. She murmurs as she writes, low and rhythmic, like a bee trapped in a jar. The tablet, you realise, is a katadesmos, a binding spell, and the words etched into the metal are raw and desperate. Let the Sandros forget all women but me. Let his loins burn until he returns. Below the text, there's a name. Hers, probably, and a crude drawing of a man with exaggerated genitals. You watch as she rolls the tablet, pierces it with a nail, and drops it into a small jar filled with dirt, hair, and... Wait, is that a chicken foot? A glaze catches your look and smirks. The gods don't care about pretty, she says. They care about blood, breath, and desperation. You ask her how often prostitutes come to her. She raises an eyebrow like you just asked whether fish like water. They're half my business, she says. Men come to me for power. Women come to me for survival. She gestures to a basket in the corner, where dozens of rolled-up spells sit waiting for burial, each one a secret scratched in lead, written by women trying to keep a client, steal one, ruin a rival, or just be remembered. You pick one up carefully. It reads, "Make Demetrios suffer for leaving me. Let his bed bring him no pleasure. Let every woman's kiss taste like ash." You don't know if it works, but you believe she believed it would. And that belief? That's what matters. In ancient Athens, magic wasn't just the stuff of myths. It was embedded into everyday life, especially for people with no power. Women, slaves, foreigners, and yes, prostitutes. They used what they had. Wax dolls pierced with needles, hair clippings, menstrual blood, herbs tied with thread, chants whispered at crossroads or buried beneath doorsteps. Some of the earliest surviving spells in the Greek world are written from the perspective of women begging gods, demons, and the dead to intervene in love, or lust, or vengeance. A glaze shows your wax figure next. Small, crude, faceless. This one's for control, she says. Bind his body, blind his eyes, bend his will. She wraps a red cord around its limbs and murmurs another incantation. She brought me his semen in a cloth, she adds casually. Burned it with the doll. That's how badly she needed him to stay. You sit there, trying to imagine the kind of desperation that leads to burning a man's DNA like an offering to invisible forces. But then again, you've seen it. Girls clawing for scraps of affection, for survival. A client lost could mean a week without food, a trip back to the auction block, or worse, another woman taking your place. Some scholars dismiss these spells as theatre, emotional venting with no real belief in outcome. Others take them seriously, pointing to how often they show up in graves, wells, even under thresholds, the ones buried near crossroads. Those were meant to reach the chthonic gods, the ones of the underworld. That's right. Prostitutes weren't just praying to Aphrodite. Sometimes they went deeper. To Hecate, to Persephone, to the dead. Anyone who might listen when no one else would. And here's the strange part. The state knew about it. Magic wasn't exactly illegal, but it wasn't encouraged either. If a spell caused harm, or if someone claimed it did, you could be dragged into court for poisoning or sorcery, but mostly people turned a blind eye. Because deep down, everyone believed a little. Aglaé opens a wooden box and shows you the strangest thing yet. A pair of sandal soles with tiny words scratched into them. She asked me to curse every step he took, she says. Said she wanted him to remember her with every footprint. The soles are worn, cracked, but the words are still there. A love spell that walks. You ask if she's ever been caught. Once, she says, shrugging. But the man who accused me died 3 weeks later. No one's bothered me since. You don't ask if she did it. She wouldn't tell you even if she had. Before you leave, she hands you a tiny pouch. Herbs, a pebble, a bit of wool. Protection, she says. You've been walking with ghosts. She's not wrong. Back in the street, the sun has slipped behind a bank of clouds. The city feels a little colder, the shadows longer. You walk slower now, watching the people around you. Who's walking with a spell hidden under their robe? Who buried a doll beneath the stairs? Who whispered their lover's name into the dirt behind a temple? You pass a man yelling at a woman who won't answer him. He spits on the ground. She walks away, head high. You wonder if she has a tablet buried somewhere with his name on it. And you wonder, if she does, maybe that's the only power she's ever had. Because in a city that taxes your body, silences your voice, and punishes your freedom, even a whispered curse becomes a kind of rebellion. Even a wax doll becomes a scream. There's a phrase you keep hearing in the corners of Athens, half-spoken, half-swallowed, like something sticky in the mouth. They don't own themselves. It's usually muttered over a cup of wine, or after a girl walks past too confidently, or when a merchant's caught visiting the same brothel for the 5th time this week. The phrase isn't new, it's not clever, but it's the whole machine boiled down into 4 bitter words. They don't own themselves, and behind that line, behind every painted doorway and sandal-scuffed step, is a web of people who do. You're in the market district now. Not among the shiny marble stalls where freeborn Athenians trade silver and politics, but the wooden awnings behind them, where the real business happens. Here the men smell like wax and smoke, their hands ink-stained and soft. These are the brokers, the dealers, the financiers of flesh. You stop near a stall that sells dyes but clearly runs something else on the side. A man with perfectly combed hair is laughing with a customer about a new batch of girls arriving next week from Lesbos. Good teeth, soft hands, and there's barely been touched. You want to spit. Instead, you follow the thread. That man isn't a pimp, not in the alleyway sense. He's a manager. He invests in brothels the way another man might invest in vineyards. He owns rooms, leases girls, pays towels, takes his profit. He doesn't get his hands dirty, just counts the coins. You find your way to another house, not a brothel this time, but a Linnaean, a kind of managerial estate owned by Alina, a madam. The woman who runs it is called Phano. She greets you in a fine robe, her hair oiled and pinned, and her smile so tight it might snap if you looked at it too hard. She's not young, her voice is scratchy, but her eyes, gods, her eyes are as sharp as bronze. She doesn't pretend to be ashamed. I provide a service service, she says, gesturing around at the finely swept courtyard. They come here because they want quality, clean rooms, clean girls, well-trained. The girls stand in a row behind her, not cowering, not bruised, just still like furniture. You ask where they're from, Phano shrugs. Asia Minor, Thrace, some local. A few were born here. Their mothers worked for me. She doesn't pause when she says it. That's the part that gets you. The complete lack of hesitation, the generational spin of the wheel. You press gently about how she came into the trade. She leans back, sips her wine and smiles. Oh, I was good, she says. Too good to fade, so I saved. I bought myself, I bought a house, and then I bought others. She says it like a riddle, like justice. She's proud. And maybe she should be. In this city there are no ladders for women, just ropes. She climbed one, but even so the house feels heavy. Clean, yes. Ordered, but heavy. You see it in the girls' eyes, each one polished, silent, trained to breathe only when allowed. Their freedom, if you can call it that, is borrowed, and it's always due back. Some historians like to imagine that madams like Phano offered protection, and sometimes they did. Better treatment, cleaner quarters, more stability. Some even taught the girls to read or helped them build savings, but the motive was always the same: profit. Phano didn't adopt these girls, she invested in them. You ask about clients, who comes here? She rattles off the names of generals, merchants, poets, even a magistrate or two. They want conversation with their wine, she says, not just thighs. You ask if the girls enjoy it. She laughs, deep and unpretty. They enjoy not starving, stapur. You try not to look away. Before you leave, one of the girls slips you a note, a tiny scrap tucked into your palm like a breath. Later, when you unfold it, it reads, "If you tell them we were happy, you lie." You carry that like a stone. On your way back through the alleys, you pass another operation. This one is rougher. A tall man with broken knuckles sits on a stool, sharpening a blade he doesn't need. The girls here are younger. Their eyes flicker constantly, reading the street like it might betray them. One is sweeping with a broken broom, but the motion is panicked, like she's brushing away memory. This place is owned by a syndicate, not one man. A group of investors, silent partners. They've turned the brothel into a stockpile. Each girl is a line in a ledger. If she gets sick, she's replaced. If she gets pregnant, sold. If she gets old, gone. You try to ask questions. They tell you to leave, quickly. It's not just men. Some women, like Fano Momano, run their own businesses. But most of the financiers are male. They stay clean, they wear perfume. They donate to temples and commission statues and attend festivals. They even speak publicly against immorality. One, a man named Nikomachos, once proposed a law that would fine women for being seen alone at night. He also owns 3 brothels. You've seen the receipts. The hypocrisy isn't even hidden. It's folded into the culture like cinnamon into bread. Sweet on the outside, rancid underneath. And here's something darkly absurd. The city tracks the profits from brothels like any other business. It's said that in certain years, during times of war or famine, sex work was among the top contributors to the public treasury. Your body could literally fund a fleet, or a feast, or someone else's statue. There's a fringe theory, whispered, debated, barely believed, that some politicians encourage trafficking during economic slumps. Not directly, of course, but they loosened regulations, offered incentives to owners, and made sure the taxes stayed steady. Better to fill the city's coffers with pain than admit it was bleeding. By now, the sun's gone down. The alley lamps are lit. You hear laughter. Not joy, just noise. A group of men passes by, a loud boasting. One of them says he just bought a girl with eyes like olives. Another bets he'll break her by the end of the week. No one flinches. You lean against a wall and try to exhale. Try to find a breath that doesn't taste like metal. But it's there, the machine, always humming. And behind every red curtain, every flickering lamp, every oil-slick smile, is someone counting. Not the girls, not the gods. The ones who own the silence. It starts with a language you don't recognize. A word caught in the throat of a girl unloading amphorae near the port, short, clipped, maybe Phrygian or Lydian. Definitely low, not Greek. She's hunched under the weight. Her tunic soaked through with seawater and sweat. A man yells at her from the dock, and she winces like the sound could bruise her head. She nods but doesn't respond. Maybe she doesn't understand, or maybe she does and just knows it's safer not to answer. You've heard 100 voices over the past weeks, high-born courtesans and street-level slaves, brothel managers and grizzled clients. But now, your ear is drawn to the accents. Foreign women, foreign girls. The ones who crossed seas in chains or in shirts, or thinking they were heading towards something better than what they left behind. Athens doesn't run on local women, it runs on imported ones. It's not a mystery. The city thrives on conquest and commerce, and between every trade caravan and warspoil's shipment, human cargo slips in beside the olives and bronze. These women and girls arrive through the Piraeus docks like any other resource, labelled, counted, sold. You head toward the warehouse quarter, where storage rooms double as holding pens. Through a crack in a wooden door you see them, lined up on rough benches, eyes sunken, dresses too large or too tight. They've been stripped of names and given new ones. Timandra, Lysistrata, Chloris. Easier for Greek tongues. Erase the syllables of their homes. Stamp them with ones that sell. A merchant, older, fat, with fingers stained by wine and pomegranate, boasts to a passing customer that his latest shipment includes 2 unspoiled girls from Colchis and a carrion dancer with hips like honey. He doesn't look ashamed. He looks proud. His words are fluent, rehearsed. You realise he's not new to this. You sit on a stone wall nearby, watching as a man inspects the girls like livestock, checks their teeth, pinches their arms, makes them spin in slow circles. One girl flinches when he lifts her chin. She's about 14. He clicks his tongue, disappointed. Too timid, he mutters. He moves on. There's no real pretense of civility here. Foreign-born women are doubly voiceless. First, because they are slaves. Second, because they are outsiders. In Athens, being a metic, a non-citizen, already meant you had limited rights, but being a foreign woman meant you were property waiting to be spent. And if you were sold into sex work, you became a coin that never stopped changing hands. Some came willingly, technically, their families sold them to clear debts or buy land. Others were kidnapped in raids or acquired through trade deals. There are records, partial, fragmented, debated, that suggest some foreign girls were gifted to Athenian officials from allied cities. Tokens of goodwill, dressed in gold and tears. The girl you saw at the beginning, the one unloading amphorae, you see her again, now kneeling outside a modest brothel. She's scrubbing the steps with a rag barely the size of her hand. Her arms are scratched, and there's a chain at her ankle, thin enough to be ignored, strong enough to mean she doesn't run. You ask her name. She looks up, eyes wide, then back down. You ask again, softer. "Levana," she whispers, and then shakes her head. "No, that's not what they call me here." You don't push. Some historians argue that Athens wasn't more cruel than other ancient cities, that slavery and prostitution were just facts of the time, that importing people from other regions was standard economic practice. But others say Athens weaponized its ideals, draped its brutality in the language of democracy and freedom while quietly building an empire of chained voices. You lean against a wall and overhear a conversation between two soldiers. One brags about a girl he brought back from a campaign in Thrace. "She fought like a wild thing," he says, laughing. "Was scratched up my arms, bit me, had to break her in." The other nods like it's a fishing story. You wonder how many of those women die in the first month? How many are passed around before they even speak the language? How many learn to smile before they understand the words behind the laughter? In a small side alley, you stumble into a house where foreign women are taught refinement, how to sit, how to pour wine, how to sing 2 verses of Homer and smile at the right lines. It's a finishing school for prostitutes. The instructor is a lean man with a cane and a sour mouth. He makes one girl walk across the room 5 times, criticizing her posture until she's visibly shaking. "No man pays for fear," he snaps. "You must look like you want to be here." She nods, but you see the lie in her eyes. A few women do manage to rise, not to freedom, but to status. A courtesan from the east, maybe Babylon or Lydia, was once the favourite of a powerful Athenian official. She learned Greek, wore silk, hosted guests, whispered in ears that shaped policy. But when he died, she was sent back to the brothel she started in. Fame here is never permanent. It's rented. Some modern scholars wonder whether these women carried cultural influence with them, if they smuggled music, dance, even religious rituals into the Athenian bloodstream. Some evidence suggests the worship of foreign deities like Isis and Cybele found traction partly through enslaved women keeping old gods alive in whispered prayers and secret rites. Their bodies were sold, but their stories weren't always, not completely. And then there's the fringe theory, the one that claims a small enclave of foreign women once escaped the city together, that they fled during a festival when the streets were distracted, that they made it to a coastal village and set up their own sanctuary. There's no proof, just the story, but it's told in corners, passed like a charm. Some of the girls in the brothels wear shells around their necks, tokens of the sea. You wonder if that's hope, or if it's just decoration. You pass a shrine on your way back into the city, this one dedicated not to a god, but to a hero. Theseus, slayer of the Minotaur, unraveller of labyrinths. At the base, someone has scrawled a message in rough lettering. Who saves the girls he leaves behind? It stays with you. You think about Levana, about her real name, about the dozens of women you've seen who were stolen from their homes, dressed in Greek names and sold like oranges in the sun, and you realise that for every girl bought and renamed, there's a silence added to the city, a history erased. Athens thrives on these ghosts, and still, every day more ships arrive. You're sitting on a stone bench in the Theatre of Dionysus, early morning before the sun has scorched the marble into something unbearable. The place is empty except for a few birds picking through food scraps and a boy sweeping dust off the stage with a palm frond. Even without the crowd, the space crackles with the memory. You can feel it in your spine, the echo of clapping hands, the boom of chorus feet stomping in unison, the laughter and gasps rising like incense. You're not here for tragedy today, you're here for comedy, specifically for the strange way ancient Athens used the stage to both mock and mythologize prostitutes, and how that humour said far more about the audience than the punchlines ever could. This was Aristophanes' playground. You've heard of him, Athens' sharpest tongue, a playwright who wrapped his criticisms in fart jokes and talking animals and cross-dressing schemes. He made the crowds roar, but beneath the laughter there was always a weapon, especially when it came to women. You slide down to a lower tier and imagine yourself in the thick of it. The festival is in full swing, the streets are drunk and the stage is set. On it, a prostitute, or a character who's clearly meant to be one, exaggerated hips, red lips, voice like a squawk. She's probably clever or conniving or conveniently stupid depending on the plot. And the audience? They're loving it. They're cheering Leah, laughing, tossing olives, maybe throwing out names of real girls they know who match the character too closely for coincidence. It's entertainment, but it's also humiliation. See, prostitutes were an easy target in comedy. They represented indulgence, decay, chaos, the very things conservative Athens liked to joke about but secretly clung to. Aristophanes used them as symbols of everything dangerous about women with voices, women with wit, women who refused to stay where they were told. In Lysistrata, for instance, women go on a sex strike to end a war. It's played for laughs, frustrated men, suggestive dances, lots of body jokes, but underneath the implication is clear: women's sexual power is disruptive. Dangerous, even when used for peace. And in Thesmophoria Zeusae, a play that flips gender roles completely, men sneak into a secret women's festival disguised in drag, only to be confronted by female characters who, surprise, talk, scheme and joke just like the men. It's hilarious. It's also unsettling. These women act too free, too smart. That's the joke. That's also the fear. Prostitutes and courtesans show up often in these plays, sometimes named, sometimes not. One especially cruel gag involves a character being threatened with being forced into prostitution as punishment, as if that's the absolute worst fate one can imagine. The audience laughs. Of course they do. Many of them slept with women in that profession the night before, but in daylight, on stage, it becomes a joke, a lesson, a warning. You wander backstage, or where backstage would be anyway, and find graffiti scratched into a pillar. Euclea is a snake with lips of honey. You don't know who she is. Maybe a courtesan, maybe a performer, maybe both. The line could be a compliment or a curse depending on the mood of the man who wrote it. And here's something weirdly modern. Some scholars argue that the way comedy mocked prostitutes actually made them more visible, more enduring. That the satire, even when cruel, preserved their names, their stories, their societal footprint. That's one way to look at it. But another theory suggests it wasn't preservation. It was disfigurement. These plays didn't show real women. They showed caricatures designed to defang them, to laugh away their intelligence, their influence, their complexity, so that men could go home afterward and feel like they were still in control. And let's not forget, women couldn't act in these plays. All female roles were played by men in masks, mimicking the very women they disdained. The joke wasn't just on prostitutes, it was on all women. Their voices literally taken, replaced with male versions, exaggerated and mocked. You walk through the rows again, imagining the crowd, thousands of men sitting shoulder to shoulder, laughing as a courtesan gets outsmarted or out-talked or dragged across the stage. Some of them had probably visited a brothel that morning. Some would again after the play. It's theatre as therapy. Laugh at what scares you, mock what tempts you. Make it small so it can't hurt you. But sometimes you learn the joke's backfired. There's a story, fringe, possibly apocryphal, about a well-known hetera named Nanion, who was parodied in a play so viciously that her name became a synonym for slut for a generation. She was ridiculed, shouted at in the streets, even had garbage thrown at her during festivals, and yet she sued. She took the playwright, maybe Aristophanes, maybe a lesser imitator, to court for slander. No one knows if she won, but the fact that she fought back, that she stood up in a system designed to laugh her into silence, that's legend. You sit with that for a moment. The idea that somewhere in a city that spat out thousands of women like her, one stood up and demanded to be seen differently, not as a joke, not as a warning, but as a person. You pass the statue of Dionysus on your way out. His face is smug, half drunk, as always. He's the god of theatre, after all, of illusion, transformation, masks. He knows that truth gets buried beneath the laughter, that the stage is a mirror, warped, cracked, but still reflecting. And maybe that's what stings the most. The women on stage never got to write the script, never got to choose their lines. They were summoned, shaped and silenced, all for applause. You look out over the city again. Athens, lit gold in the afternoon sun. The real play is still going, the roles are still being cast. But the women, they've stopped laughing. The Roman banners came quietly at first, unfurled not with fire and screams but with treaties and titles and the slow creeping erosion of control. Athens, for all her pride and gods and philosophical swagger, became just another prized antique in Rome's expanding museum. And if you thought things might get better for women, especially those already caught in the ancient gears of sex and status, you'd be wrong. Oh, so wrong. You walk now through a changed city. The columns are still there, but Roman eagles crown the arches. Latin mixes with Greek in the streets like bad wine in a good amphora. Senators from the West stroll around the agora pretending to admire Plato's legacy, while bribing local merchants and squeezing taxes from the poorest corners of the city. And the brothels, still full, still open, still thriving. Only now the accents behind the curtains have multiplied. Rome brought more than soldiers and statues. It brought an industrial mindset to pleasure. What was already systemic in Athens becomes machinery under Roman management. You notice the change almost immediately. Brothels have been standardized like bakeries. Rooms are smaller, beds are stone slabs. A list of services is carved, yes, carved, into the wall near the entrance, complete with symbols for the illiterate. There are prices too, fixed, regulated. It's prostitution as mass production. You visit one of these places, a long corridor, rooms with thin cloth doors, smells that cling to your skin even after you leave. A young girl, barely old enough to braid her hair, sits on a stool outside, chewing pomegranate seeds and watching the street. She doesn't blink when a man enters, she just stands, smooths her tunic, and disappears behind the curtain. No words, just rhythm. Inside, a wax tablet sits on a counter. The brothel owner is recording visits, names, times, services rendered. You ask if it's for taxes. He grunts. And inventory. You don't ask what he means by that, you already know. One of the rooms has a wall painting, cheap, flaking, of Aphrodite lounging nude with a golden belt in around her waist. Underneath it, someone scratched a crude joke. Even the goddess needs coin. The girls don't laugh when they see it. They've seen it too many times. You learn about the lupanaria, the wolf dens. That's what the Romans called their brothels. Not temples, not houses of love. Dens, places of hunger and teeth. The term trickles into Athens now, a dirty word wrapped in Latin syllables. Some brothels here begin calling themselves that, thinking it makes them more profitable. It does, but there are still hetairai, though their ranks have thinned. The elite courtesans of Athens are now competing with exotic imports. Gaulish women with pale skin, Egyptian dancers with tattooed ankles, Spanish girls trained in flute and flirtation. Roman tastes are eclectic, and they pay well. But loyalty? That's gone. Courtesans are discarded like sandals after one festival too many. You meet a woman named Ligeia, once the most envied hetaira in the city. She tells you her story over watered wine and a half-eaten fig. I had poets carve verses for me, she says. Now I sing for my supper in Latin. She gestures to her dress, once silk, now linen. I made the mistake of getting old. You ask what old means. She shrugs. 29, and she tells you Roman men are different. More violent, less curious. Athenian men wanted to be seduced, she says. Romans want to win. She shows you the scar on her thigh. One of them liked knives, said it helped him feel something. She says it flatly, as if describing the weather. You walk later through the temple district, hoping for something older, something unspoiled. But even the sacred spaces have changed. At the Temple of Aphrodite, there are new statues, more marble curves, more suggestive poses. One shows the goddess lifting her robes above her knees, eyes downcast. Roman style, a passing priest says, as if it's an upgrade. You wonder what the old priestesses would have said. And here's the kicker. Rome legalized more of it. Regulated it, stamped it with approval. In theory, this offered protection. In reality, it just legitimized exploitation. A girl could be licensed for sex work at 12. If she was a slave, she didn't need to consent. Her master did that for her. You pass a lawyer's office and spot a papyrus posted outside. A public notice listing the recent registration of meretrices, a Roman word for prostitutes. It's a roll call of pain. Names, ages, places of origin, most from out of town. Some barely older than children. There's a note at the bottom. Renewal due in 6 months. You want to scream? Some argue Rome brought order. That taxes meant records, records meant names, and names meant memory. that in some small way, these women were less invisible under Roman rule. Others call that delusion. What good is a name on a scroll if it's attached to a chained ankle? And the worst? The stigma doubled. Under Athens, prostitutes were degraded, but at least their work had religious echoes, sacred connections to Aphrodite or ritual. Under Rome, it was filth, pure and simple. They were called infemmes, literally people without a voice. They couldn't testify in court, couldn't inherit, couldn't own property. Some were branded on the face to mark them forever. You meet a girl named Dido, not her real name, but the one she was given when she was sold. Her cheek bears the mark, a tiny F for fornicatrix. It's not fresh, but it's deep. She says she once tried to run away, thinking she could become a servant or a farmhand. They found her 2 towns over. Her owner beat her, branded her, then sold her back into a different brothel for less money. Damaged goods, she says with a bitter laugh. You ask if she remembers her birth name. She looks up at the sky for a long time before answering. Yes, she says, but I don't say it out loud, it doesn't belong here. As you leave, a Roman official passes by, escorted by 2 slaves and a courtesan in full regalia. Her dress is sheer, her sandals are gold, her smile is perfect. She catches your eye and holds it, not a glance but a dare. She's beautiful, she's sharp, and you know without asking she's owned. Rome didn't break the system, it just perfected it. And Athens, she just adjusted her mask. You first hear the music before you see the crowd, flutes, drums, some kind of deep rhythmic chant that doesn't sound Greek or Roman, but older, heavier. You follow it through the winding streets, past sleeping dogs and flickering oil lamps, until you reach the base of a hill you don't recognize. Above it, torches bob like fireflies. Someone's tied red ribbons to the trees. The night smells like wine, sweat, and something metallic. You're not sure if you're intruding or being invited. It's a festival night, one of the secret ones. You climb slowly, the earth damp beneath your sandals. People pass you with eyes wide and pupils too large, wearing flower crowns or nothing at all. Men and women both, most barefoot, most humming under their breath. Some are drunk, some are definitely not themselves, but all are moving toward the same place. At the top of the hill, in a clearing surrounded by dark trees, there's a circle of people gathered around a fire. You stop at the edge, blending into the shadows. What you're seeing isn't a performance. It's not for the public, not for tourists. This is a ritual, a real one, sacred, dangerous, beautiful and very, very old. A woman steps forward. She's tall, bare-chested, wrapped in crimson cloth from the waist down. Gold rings hang from her ears. Her skin is smeared with ash, and in her hand is a bowl, dark, steaming. She sings something low and foreign. It pulls at your bones like tidewater. Beside her, another woman dances. Her hair is unbound, her feet bleeding from the rocks, but her eyes shine like they see something none of the rest of you can. The crowd doesn't cheer. They don't move, they just watch. And then, as if summoned, others join, 3, then 5, then a dozen women stepping into the circle. Some are clearly prostitutes. You recognize the way they carry themselves. Practiced, wary, knowing. Others might be temple attendants, or slaves, or farmers' daughters drawn by something they can't explain. But here, under torchlight and starlight, they move like priestesses. The woman with the bowl lifts it to the sky. Her voice breaks into something harsher now. Almost a scream, but rhythmic, ancient. She pours the contents, blood, maybe wine, maybe both, onto the earth. A libation, an offering. And this, you realize, isn't for Dionysus. Not fully. It's for her, the other goddess, the darker one, the one who doesn't smile in marble or wear roses in her hair. Some call her Hecate. Others just call her the lady at the crossroads. Tonight she has many names, all of them dangerous. You ask someone beside you what's happening. A young man with wild eyes whispers, "It's the night of the flesh." He says it like a prayer or a warning. There are stories, rare, debated, fringe, that once a year, certain cults in and around Athens held fertility rites so old they made the Olympians seem like new kids on the block. That during these nights, sex wasn't transactional, it was sacred. Women could choose their partners, or refuse, or go into the forest alone and return changed. Or not return at all. In these moments, prostitutes were not property. They were vessels, oracles, daughters of the divine. The Romans hated it, of course. tried to ban it. Too pagan, too messy, too feminine. But like all things outlawed, it just slipped deeper underground. You see one woman step forward now, hands painted red, and speak a name into the fire. Not a man's name, a child's. She cries out something in a language you don't understand, then collapses. Another woman lifts her. No one mocks, no one jeers. This is grief, or sacrifice, or both. And you realise the gods they're calling on tonight, they don't want statues or speeches. They want blood, memory, truth. There's a legend, one no respectable historian will confirm, that during certain nights, selected women were offered to the gods not in metaphor but in flesh, that some were chosen to couple with masked priests as part of a divine union, others perhaps to be given to the gods in darker ways. Was it symbolic? Was it real? Some say it was liberation, others say it was ritualized rape. There's no consensus, only fragments, broken pottery, odd inscriptions, too many bones found in wells with no explanation. And yet the women keep coming. You think of Damaris, of Cleonica, of Levana. If they stood in this circle, would they be seen, revered, or just used differently? The fire cracks loudly. Someone throws herbs into it, sei maybe, or something less legal. The sound curls upward and the mood shifts. The crowd begins to sway, the chant builds, and suddenly you understand the danger. This isn't theatre. It's transformation. What starts as ritual can tip easily into frenzy. Someone screams, ecstatic, feral, and others answer. Bodies touch, press, melt. The boundaries between sacred and profane dissolve like wax in the heat. In the shadows, sex begins, not in shame but as offering, as declaration. You step back, unsure whether you're witnessing something beautiful or horrific, or both. You don't know the rules, you don't know if there are rules. Later, as dawn pinks the horizon, the hill begins to empty. People stumble down quietly, eyes hollow or wide or red-rimmed. Some look lighter, some look broken. A girl walks past you, mud on her knees, her mouth cut at the corner. She's humming a lullaby. You make your way down too, back into the waking world. The city seems too clean, too orderly. The markets are opening, children are shouting, priests are sweeping the temple steps. The world resets like nothing happened. But it did, and it always does. You wonder how many men will sleep with prostitutes today, never knowing that the night before those same women stood crowned in ash and fire, kissed by gods older than their names. And you wonder too how many gods are still hungry. The city feels strangely sober in the days that follow. No drums in the distance. No sacred flames flickering behind temple walls. The wild perfume of that hilltop rite still clings faintly to your memory. But Athens has put its mask back on, tight, polished, respectable. Men are back to talking politics and olive oil prices, women back to shadows. The gods are back to marble. But there's a quiet thread that runs through the cobblestones now, something brittle and cold. You start noticing things, like the sudden absence of certain girls from the brothels you've passed too many times, or the bruises that aren't hidden as well, or the marks, not painted but cut, not decorative but permanent. You ask around cautiously. You ask a potter whose cousin manages girls. You ask a boy who runs errands for a mid-tier brothel. You even ask a drunk at the symposium who once bragged about sleeping with 2 sisters at once, and the answers start to trickle in. You knew there was punishment for disobedience, for escape, for resistance, but you didn't know how brutal it could be. Some girls, when they run away and get caught, are shaved bald and paraded through the streets. That's the kind version. Others are branded, hot iron pressed to skin, usually the forehead or in a thigh, letters burned in for life. P for pawn, sometimes S for slave. If you're very unlucky, your owner gets creative. One girl, they say, was punished for biting a client. She had her front teeth knocked out. Another tried to poison her madam. Her tongue was split. Not fatally, just enough to slur her words. A warning wrapped in flesh. You find yourself walking to the edge of the city, toward a grim little structure by the cemetery wall. No plaque, no name, just stone walls and a wooden gate that creaks like it's been screaming for centuries. It's where they take the girls they don't want seen, the ones who are being corrected. It's not a prison. It's a holding house, for discipline, for reconditioning, for punishment. You linger outside long enough for someone to mistake you for a customer. A man leans out the gate, grins and says, "They're cheaper in there. Not as pretty, but they'll listen." You don't answer. You don't go in, but the images rush in anyway. You learn about exile too, that some women, after causing too much trouble, are simply tossed out, not freed, not released, just discarded. Sent beyond the city walls with nothing but a tunic and a threat. They aren't allowed to settle anywhere with temples, or farms, or functioning markets, because no one wants a branded prostitute living near their wife or daughter. One story stands out, whispered from the mouth of a sandal maker's apprentice, whose aunt once worked in a brothel near the old baths. She tells you about a girl named Myrene, who fell in love with a client. Not unusual, but he promised to buy her, marry her, and to take her to Corinth. She believed him. She stole coin from her madame and waited at the dock. He never came. She was caught, beaten, then blinded, one eye left as a warning. So she could still see, the madam said, just not believe. Oh, you ask if she's still alive. The apprentice shakes her head. Not sure, but her story makes the rounds whenever a girl starts asking for affection. Even in death, Myrene is useful. You think again about the myth of Aphrodite, of beauty, desire, danger. But this isn't divine punishment, it's human, it's systematic, it's designed to break bodies into obedience. And the law? Silent. Or worse, participating. There are debates among modern scholars about how widespread these punishments were. Some argue they were rare, outliers, rumours exaggerated by anti-Athenian writers. Others say they were common but hidden, that the lack of records doesn't prove innocence, only shame. One fringe theory suggests that some punishments were ritualized, that the branding itself was meant to mimic sacrificial rites. The body as offering, as message, as warning to the gods and mortals alike. That theory's not mainstream, but after what you've seen, it doesn't feel impossible. You pass a woman in the agora, selling herbs. Her face is covered with a sheer veil, not for modesty, but to hide the scar that curves from her temple to her jaw. She doesn't speak much, just stares through you. You see a faded mark on her arm, a pea maybe, or something else. Her herbs are good, her eyes are hollow, and then late one night you return to a brothel you haven't visited in weeks. It's quieter now, fewer girls, a new madam. You ask about a girl named Thalea, the one with the sharp mouth and clever stories. The new madam frowns. That one ran off, she says. They found her. You ask what happened. The madam shrugs. Don't worry. She won't be talking clever anymore. She says it like you might say the weather's changing. And the worst part, you realise you're not shocked. Not anymore. Just tired. The punishment system isn't just about discipline, it's about memory. A way to etch the hierarchy into skin, so that even if a girl escapes, the mark stays. The shame clings. The city never lets her forget. And yet, there's one thread of resistance in all of this. A rumour. A tale. You hear it from a boy who cleans chamber pots at the holding house. He says one girl, he doesn't know her name, refused punishment. Bit off her own tongue before they could brand her. They let her go. No one wanted a mute prostitute. He says she lives outside the city now, alone, growing grapes, smiling like she's got something to say. You don't know if it's true, but you hold on to it anyway, because in a world that punishes women for wanting more than survival, silence might be the only rebellion left. You start noticing them once you know what to look for. Traces of resistance etched into the corners of the city like graffiti under the grime. A broken sandal tucked into a temple step. A small bronze pendant, shaped like a clenched fist, buried beneath a column's base. Scratched letters on a stone wall too low for most people to read. You bend to study them. She was not what they said she was. Athens is a city of records, but it's also a city of erasure. For every speech that survives, for every law carved into stone, there are 100 voices that were never written down. Voices like the girls in the brothels, the ones who were punished, branded, forgotten. But not all of them stayed forgotten. Not all of them stayed silent. You're chasing rumours now. Whispers about a kind of underground memory. A soft resistance. You start at the laundries, those steamy, dummy, stinking corners of the city where slave women scrub tunics until their fingers bleed. The women here know everything. They hear it all. They see the bruises, the stains, the stories sewn into linen and leather. One older woman, with forearms like tree roots and a braid down to her hip, tells you about messages passed inside laundry bundles. If you stitch the thread wrong, she says, they know it's for someone who matters. A signal, a code. Next you visit a potter's workshop near the river. not for the pots, but for the woman who paints them. She's called Chryseis. Her arms are freckled with ink, and she claims to have been born in Delphi, though her accent says otherwise. She makes tiny oil lamps mostly, but if you look close, some of them bear images that don't match the mythologies they're supposed to represent. One shows a woman leading a man by the hand, not seductively, but protectively. Another shows a female figure burning something in a bowl, her face turned away from the gods. Decorative, Chryseis says when you ask, but her smile suggests otherwise. Then there are the bathhouses, not the public ones, but the side chambers rented by courtesans for more private clients. Some say the walls of these rooms are layered with messages, pressed into wet plaster with fingernails, knives, even teeth. You sneak into one during repairs. The manager is drunk, the workers bored. In the steam-stained light, you trace faint words carved into the back of a changing room door. She left through the orchard. You don't know what it means, maybe no one does, but it meant something to someone, and that's enough. There's also talk of gatherings, small, secret, not the hilltop festivals, not religious rites, just women meeting in the backs of shops, in old grain storage rooms, in ruined shrines. They share food, herbs, names. You hear of one meeting where an older woman taught the others how to fake convulsions. If they think you're sick, they won't touch you, she supposedly said. If they think it's contagious, they'll leave you alone. Not glamorous, not poetry, but resistance. There are stories too about women leaving behind scrolls, not public declarations, but diaries, hidden between floorboards, folded into jars. A few have been found over the years, mostly by accident. Fragments, really. A line here, a paragraph there. One reads, "Today I did not cry when he finished. I stared at the wall and pretended I was already gone." Another simply says, "I am writing this so I exist somewhere outside of their hands." Some historians doubt their authenticity. They argue the language is too emotional, too modern. Others believe these scraps are real, that they survive because someone, somewhere, risked everything to record something personal in a world that denied her personhood. You believe they're real, because what kind of person fakes pain like that? Who would invent that sort of stillness? One afternoon you visit an olive grove on the city's edge, rumoured to be a meeting place for former prostitutes who bought their freedom. It's quiet, peaceful, no signs, no altars, just low branches and soft dirt. A woman sits under a tree mending a sandal. She doesn't speak until you do. Then she gestures to the grove. "We planted every tree ourselves," she says. "One for each name we refuse to forget." You ask how many. She shrugs. "We stopped counting." She offers you an olive. You take it. It's bitter. Real. And for the first time in weeks, you realise something. These women weren't just surviving. They were archiving themselves, smuggling memories into the future, into places where the state couldn't reach, into stitches, into pottery, into scars. You think again of that rumour, the one about the sanctuary village by the coast and where foreign-born women escaped and built a life. You never found it. Maybe it doesn't exist. Or maybe it's right here, hidden in plain sight. A grove, a note, a painted lamp, a whisper loud enough to echo across centuries. You pause by the steps of a ruined temple on your way back into the city. Someone has painted something there in coal-black ink. It's nearly faded, but you can still make out the shape of it. A woman's hand, palm open, fingers spread, no name, no explanation, just presence. And in this city that builds monuments to men while burying the women who fed, healed, entertained and endured them, you realise presence is the rebellion. You're standing at the edge of the Acropolis now, looking down at a city you've spent what feels like a lifetime trying to understand. The Parthenon looms behind you, clean, proud, falsely sent. Tourists would call it beautiful, historians might call it legacy, but you, after everything, know it as something else, a monument to selective memory, to the kind of history that chisels names into stone while leaving bodies buried in silence. And somewhere down there, in the narrow, crooked streets below the gleaming temples and marble theatres, are the unmarked lives, the ones not taught in schools, not celebrated in plays, the prostitutes of ancient Athens, foreign and local, high class and enslaved, worshipped and whipped, touched and discarded, remembered only when men decided they were useful. You find yourself back in the brothel district one last time, not because you want to, but because it feels unfinished. The same broken signs hang from crumbling door frames. The same smoke curls from the chimneys. Some of the faces are new, too young, too clean to last long. Others somehow are still here, older, harder, wearing their survival like armor. One woman passes you, her eyes flat as slate. She carries bread and a small jar of oil. You realize she's not a worker anymore, maybe a madam now, or just a neighbor, still living near the trade because where else could she go? You duck into the courtyard of a once bustling brothel. It's quiet now, almost empty. A cat naps on a windowsill. The smell of stale wine clings to the walls. On the far side, etched faintly into the stone near the doorway, are two names. You can barely read them. Timoret, Pilia, no dates, no titles, just names side by side, like a grave marker for the unnamed. You think of the girls whose lives you've walked beside, Thaleia with her biting tongue, Damaris still sweeping the same step, Levana, whose name was stolen, Cleonica, who grew bitter herbs in a courtyard and held the silence of others like prayers, Myrene, punished for believing in love, Dido branded, Ligeia, discarded after her last profitable year, the girl who sang after the ritual on the hilltop, her mouth bleeding, and beyond them, the ones who left no name at all. There's a lull in the street noise, a rare moment of stillness. You look around and wonder how many ghosts are watching. Not angry, not weeping, just present. Here's a scholarly debate you're not ready to let go of. The question of legacy. Whether these women shaped the culture, or were merely shaped by it. Some argue they influenced art, poetry, philosophy. After all, Socrates spoke to Aspasia, didn't he? Others argue that influence isn't the same as power, that no matter how clever or cultured they were, they could still be bought, sold, silenced. But maybe legacy isn't about grand contributions. Maybe it's not about quotes in scrolls or statues in city squares. Maybe it's just about persistence, about leaving something behind when the world tried to erase you. You make your way to the agora one last time. The merchants are already arguing. A man is selling figs, another is hawking scrolls filled with bad poetry. You pass a musician playing a lyre. His song is soft but familiar, something about longing. You sit on a bench near a group of boys debating philosophy. One of them quotes Plato, something about the soul being tied to truth and beauty. Another snickers and points to a woman walking past. She's painted, perfumed, clearly working. The boys laugh. You watch her go. She doesn't flinch. She's heard it all before. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all. Not the myths, not the punishments, not even the quiet rebellions, but the fact that she keeps walking. There's a cracked fountain nearby. A small one. Nothing grand. No inscriptions, but someone has wedged a tiny offering into its base. 2 flowers tied with thread and a single bronze coin. It's not a temple. It's not a grave. It's just a pause, a marker, a soft memory in a city that rarely allows softness. You stand there for a long time looking at the coin. You don't touch it. You don't need to. It's not for you. It's for them. Because after all the candles burned, the trials heard, the songs sung, the gods invoked, the laws written and rewritten, one truth remains: the women of Athens' underworld, the prostitutes, the courtesans, the slaves, the girls sold too soon were always part of the city. Not outside it, not beneath it, of it. They carried its weight, fed its men, appeased its gods, entertained its thinkers, paid its taxes, raised its unwanted children, survived its cruelty and they left behind echoes, not enough for a temple, but maybe enough for a whisper. So now here you are, lying in your bed, fan humming softly, room dimmed, that perfect sleepy glow. The echoes of ancient Athens still linger in your mind. Cobbled streets, torchlight glinting off cheap jewellery, whispered prayers tucked behind cracked temple walls. You've walked through brothels and banquets, past statues and scar stories, across festivals and punishments, and somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing those women as a blurry historical footnote and started seeing them as people. Flawed, complicated, surviving. And that's the dark truth, isn't it? That beneath all the myths and marble, ancient Athens, glorious, enlightened, legendary, was also built on silence, a silence worn like perfume, a silence paid in skin, a silence passed down through laws, laughter, and the daily choice to look away. But the women you met in this story, they didn't look away. Even when they were punished for speaking, even when their names were erased, even when their histories were written by the same men who bought their bodies, they persisted, in ash, in ink, in stitched thread and scratched stone. And you listened, which honestly is more than most ever did. So now, let the hum of your fan blur into ocean waves. Let the torches fade behind your eyes. Let Lavana, Thalea, Damaris, and all the others drift with you into sleep. Not as victims, not even as rebels, but simply as people who lived, who endured, who mattered. Their story doesn't need an ending, it just needed someone to remember. Good night, dreamer, you made it.